And welcome back to Regaining the Balance. This is Matt. We're going to be continuing the Bhagavad Gita line for line commentary with Yogananda. This will be part 4. So before we start, sound sounds good. But before we start, let me go ahead and, if I can get to it. There we go. So, Yogananda.org, the man who wrote this book. This is where you can find all kinds of different things regarding the style of Vedanta meditation and philosophy and all the stuff that is essentially put out in this book. So if you guys are interested, you should check that out. It's by the very man who wrote the book here that we're reading. So, oops, I'm not sure what just happened there. Anyways, let's get to it. And let me make sure that I can see the chat in case I need to. All right. Here we go. Okay, so. Excellent. Verse 16. Of the unreal there is no existence. Of the real there is no non-existence. The final truth of both of these is known by men of wisdom. The senses say that the flower that was never born has shed no fragrance. Things that were never real have never been non-existent. But the garden rose by its fragrance, and the stars by their twinkle in the sky proclaim their reality. The seers of truth, however, know them all to be equally unreal. For the rose will fade away, and many a distant star whose glimmer dots the heavens has long since ceased to be. Could something become nothing? Possessors of wisdom perceive as real only that which changes not, the essence that became the star, and the idea of the flower in the poet's mind. The wise alone know the mystery of the real and unreal. The ocean can exist without the waves, but the waves cannot manifest without the ocean. The ocean is the real substance. The waves are only temporary changes on the ocean, and therefore, quote unquote, unreal. In themselves, they have no independent existence. The ocean, in essence, does not change whether it is calm or restless with waves, but the waves change their forms. They come and they go. Their essence is change, and therefore unreality. Sat, Asat, spirit, and nature. The eternal substance is said to be divided into two, the Sat, or changeless spirit, and the Asat, the unreal or ever-changing nature, the cosmic mother of 24 attributes. There are two ways of perceiving substance, as the changeless spirit and as the ever-changing creation. These modes of perception are called anuloma, in correct direction, and viloma, turned in the wrong way. To behold nature, spirit, as matter is the viloma, delusive way in which the vision, being directed outward through the senses towards the end products, quote-unquote, perceives only the waves of delusive creation. To turn the perception inward, and thus to see from outward peripheries of matter into the inner point of spirit, is the anuloma, or wisdom mode of vision. Through inward turn perception, one can trace the cause of all activities of creation. When the mind is fixed on the primal root principle of all manifestation, one realizes that gross matter is the result of the mixture of the 5 subtle astral elements of earth, water, fire, air, and ether, and that all elements successfully melt into the ultimate cause or spirit. Thus, those, therefore, who do not look into matter through the senses, but who look through matter into spirit, really know the mystery of the unreal and the real. The real, unchanging through eternity, is existent. The unreal, changeable, is only relatively existent. Substance exists. Phenomena, which cannot exist without the existence of substance, have no separate existence. The ordinary individual considers matter as real because manifest. He ignores the spirit as unreal because hidden. This delusion enshrouds him in ignorance and suffering. The wise man tears aside the appearance of the delusive creation, and perceiving the everlasting reality is permanently happy. Sages behold the way in which the waves of unreality crop up from reality and cover its oneness, just as many waves hide the inseverable unity of the ocean. By this view, the wise ones become fixed in the unchangeable spirit and ignore the changes of the so-called matter-of-fact world. Knowledge of reality does not make one vague or visionary, shirking his duties. The knower of reality may be said to be a sane person in the midst of lunacy. Verse 17. Know as imperishable the one by whom everything has been manifested and pervaded. No one has power to bring about the annihilation of this unchangeable spirit. The one life that breathes into existence all temporal beings, forming them out of his own being, is indestructible, everlasting. Though all changeable objects of creation melt away, nothing affects the the immutability of God. Thank you. I don't know why I stumbled on that. When an abode house is shattered by an earthquake, the clay does not change its nature. Similarly, when this cosmic clay house of change is touched by dissolution, its essence remains unchanged. Just as electrons or atoms of hydrogen and oxygen that compose steam, water, and ice are manifestations of different rates of vibration of one primal energy, so man, beasts, worlds, and all projections of creation are changeable forms of the one spirit. Even if planets were hurled from their orbits, even if all matter were to melt into nothingness, there could be no iota of vacant space, space empty of spirit. Forms of creation and the great void, both are equally pervaded by spirit. Kingdoms may topple, oceans evaporate, and the earth turn into vapor. Still, spirit remains, untouched, hidden, and indestructible. When through meditation man chooses to be identified with the unchangeable spirit, he will no longer be deluded and tortured by the pandemonium of change. Regarded as having a, verse 18, regarded as having a termination of existence are, regarded as having a termination of existence are these fleshly garments, immutable, imperishable, limitless is the indwelling self. With this wisdom, O descendant of Bharata, Arjuna, battle thou. Quote, the divine indweller, the ever youthful one, whom the fingers of decay dare not touch, the one whose home is the region without boundaries, the one who can never be invaded by destruction, he it is who wears many costumes of flesh. Though his bodily garments decay, he himself is imperishable. Equipped with his armor of wisdom, O Arjuna, descendant of brave Bharata, boldly enter the arena of inner battle. It looks like I'm getting some connection problems here. Hopefully this doesn't continue. The devotee, while still contending with strong inner persuasions of delusion attached to the body, afraid to relinquish the senses and identification with mortal consciousness, is a bird of eternity locked in a little cage. Man, as an eagle of immortality at home in eternal space, should not be fearful to rise above the body, from which in any case he will be ousted at the call of death. Krishna therefore tells Arjuna, quote, concentrate on your inner self, the image of the eternal spirit, which, like it, is immortal. Fear not to fight the senses and to destroy the attachment to the body. This, sooner or later, you will be compelled to do. The dread of losing the body often invades even an advanced devotee when the delusive cohesion between the body and soul makes him temporarily forget that he is a mortal spirit. His body is no part of him. The yogi aims at such complete mastery over the body that its very atoms will obey his command, even as Jesus and Kabir and many other illuminated masters were able not only to give up the body at will, but also to demonstrate its illusory nature by resurrecting it after death or dematerializing it into spirit. Even in a material war of righteousness where the protection of the weak is necessary, a soldier should not be afraid to give up his perishable body. Virtue acquired by sacrifice is never lost. Better a death of righteousness than the ordinary ignoble death. It is more laudable to die for the general welfare than to expire on the comfortable bed of selfishness. Verse 19, he who considers the self as the slayer, he who deems that it can be slain, neither of these knows the truth. The self does not kill, nor is it killed. He dreams who deems the self a dark slayer. Ere drunk is he who thinks death can touch the self. Neither view is true. The self could never soil its hand of justice with the blood of slaughter, nor is there any power by which the soul may be slain. Just as the dying hero on a motion picture screen has not really been slain, so the soul of a man playing a role in the cosmic motion picture of life is ever living. The victim and the killer in the screen of drama are only two forms of electric shadows. The villain of the screen and the villain of death alike kill no one. The immortal self remains untouched when its body cloak is destroyed, just as a man does not die when his house crumbles away. One soul cannot kill another soul. Both are reflections of the immortal spirit. This deep philosophy should not be misused by those who may erroneously think, quote, let us murder our enemies, their souls are immortal anyways, we cannot be called killers even if we do kill, unquote. This kind of reasoning impresses neither God nor the mundane police. The quantity of water contained in ocean waves remains the same whether the waves play on the sea breast or lie hidden beneath it. Similarly, the soul waves of life remain constant whether they play on the surface of the sea or rest deep within its bosom. The stanza expresses the profound truth of the immortal nature not only of the soul but of matter. As a reflection of spirit, even matter is indestructible. The essence of matter is never destroyed. The human body, made of patterns of condensed electrons that are superficially changed by death, is in reality never annihilated. Every form, thought, motion that has been exhibited on the screen of space and time is recorded permanently. These cosmic motion pictures and they were never more than that, portrayed by immortal souls, are preserved in the infinite archives. Those God-realized souls who earn entrance into the secret vaults of spirit know the wonder of this mystery of immortality. Verse 20. The self is never born, nor does it ever perish, nor having come into existence will it again cease to be. It is birthless, eternal, changeless, ever same, unaffected by the usual processes associated with time. It is not slain when the body is killed. The soul, in essence, the reflection of spirit, never undergoes the pangs of birth, nor the throes of death, nor having once been projected from the womb of immortal spirit, will Prince Soul, on return to spirit, lose its individuality. Having entered the portals of nativity, its existence will never cease. In all its bodily birth, the spirit soul never felt birth. It exists everlastingly, untouched by the Maya magic fingers of change. It is ever the same, now, past, future, as it has always been, ageless, unchanged since its immemorial beginnings. The deathless soul, dwelling in the destructible body, is ever constant through all cycles of bodily disintegrations. It does not taste death even when the body quaffs that fatal cup of hemlock. How interesting. The body, as a part of matter, is spoken of as undergoing the following 6 transformations of impermanent nature: birth, existence, development, change, decay, and annihilation. The man dwelling in a perishable body forgets the imperishable soul within it. His body-identified consciousness is aware of only of its 6 conditions. The wise man learns by meditation to differentiate between the indwelling immortal soul and its perishable bodily encasement. People who believe that the absolute spirit, ever existing, ever conscious, ever new bliss, is immortal. People who believe that the absolute spirit is immortal must also accept the truth that its reflection, the soul, even though encased in a mortal body, is immortal too. Bhagavan Krishna's words in these lines particularly emphasize the truth as God is immortal. Every man's soul made in the image of God must also be immortal. The difference between soul and spirit is this: the spirit is ever existing, ever conscious, ever new, omnipresent joy. The soul is the individualized reflection of ever existing, ever conscious, ever new joy, confined within the body of each and every being. Souls radiating rays of spirit. Souls are the radiating rays of spirit, individualized as formless, vibrationless, quote-unquote, atoms and quote-unquote tissues of spirit. Hence, they are coexistent with spirit and of the same essence, as the sun and its rays are one. Though incarnate, the soul belongs to the noumenal region, which changes not. All material forms belong to the region of phenomena. Very nature being alienated from spirit, they change constantly. Phenomena arises from and are inseparably linked with noumena, but the latter, being of spirit, are immutable and transcendent. The outer surface of the soul's consciousness that is cloaked with the instrumentalities of the ego, mind, senses, undergoes the permutations of nature, but the soul's essence remains inviolable. Worldly men do not know what the soul is, or how it comes into the physical body, and then after a short sojourn to what destiny it slips away. Trillions of men have mysteriously come on earth and just as mysteriously departed. That is why people in general cannot but wonder if the soul undergoes extinction along with the destruction of the body. The following analogy gives an illustration of the nature and immortality of the soul. No analogies are perfect in expressing absolute verities, but they do help the mind to imagine abstract concepts. That's a good point. The moon is reflected in a cup containing water. The cup is broken and the water runs out. Where does the reflection of the moon go? The reflection of the moon may be said to have returned to its inseverable identity to the moon itself. If another cup of water is placed under the moon, another reflection of the moon would be reincarnated. The soul is similarly reflected in the bodily cup filled with water of the mind. Within it we see the moon soul circumscribed by the bodily limitations as the reflection of the omnipresent moon of spirit. With the destruction of the body cup, the moon reflection may for some time appear in the spirit, but by use of the power of the free choice bestowed on it as the image of spirit, it creates desires and karma, while on earth that cause it to choose to be reflected again as the moon soul within another bodily cup. Thus, though the bodies of man be mortal and changeable, immortal is the soul within them. The reflected moon, circumscribed by a little cup, becomes, at the destruction of the cup, the one moon whose rays spread over the sky. Similarly, the soul, when fully liberated from imprisoning desires, become omnipresent like the spirit. However, man has three bodies from which he must free his consciousness before he can achieve final emancipation. These soul confinements are physical body of 16 elements, the astral body of 19 elements, and the causal bodies of 35 elemental ideas. The physical body is made of blood and flesh, the astral body is composed of life force and mind, and the causal or ideational body is woven together with wisdom and ever-new bliss. Liberation from the three bodies. God originated in the form of causal body, 35 ideas as the matrix of human creation. These ideas are the basic or thought forces required to create the astral and physical body. 19 of these ideas were manifested as the subtle astral body, which contains the 10 senses, 5 life forces, and the ego, feeling, mind, and intelligence. The remaining 16 ideas were converted into the gross physical body of 16 basic elements. In other words, before God created the physical body consisting of iron, phosphorus, calcium, and so forth, and the subtle astral body of lifeltronic composition, he had first to project them as ideas, the constituents of the causal body. Each of the three bodies has its distinguishing qualities. The dense physical body is the result of solidified vibrations, the astral body of energy and mind vibrations, and the causal body of nearly pure vibrations of cosmic consciousness. The physical body may be said to be dependent on food, the astral body is dependent on energy, will, and evolution of thought, and the causal body is dependent on the ambrosia of wisdom and bliss. The soul is encased in these three bodies. At death, the physical body is destroyed. The other two bodies, astral and causal, are still held together by desires and unworked out karma. The soul, wearing these two bodies, repeatedly reincarnates in new physical forms. When all desires are conquered by meditation, the three body prisons are dissolved and the soul becomes spirit. Again, an analogy may help to illustrate the reabsorption of the soul into spirit. The perfect man's consciousness is apparently dissolved in the ocean of God. These soul waves, which are not driven by any post-mortem storms of desires, become absolute oceanic spirit. In becoming spirit, they possess omnipresent memory, even of the individual consciousness of their own past soul wave. Fully dissolved, wave emerges into the ocean of spirit, but still remembers that from the original ocean of spirit it became a soul wave and again changed from soul wave into one spirit. For example, God is the soul of a particular man, John, a mortal through delusory body identification. By meditation, John again united himself with God, finding that it was God in the first place whom became John. By developing wisdom, John became God. In the deluded mortal state, John found himself to be the soul wave part of the ocean of spirit. Then, by spreading his consciousness and realizing the spirit as his foundation, he discovered it was the spirit ocean that had become his soul wave. Now merged again in the one spirit, the liberated soul of John, even though one with spirit, would retain its individuality in the sense that it would always remember and know that it had once been John, the soul wave that without knowing it had floated on the surface of the ocean of spirit. When John the mortal became John the immortal, he did not lose his identity but realized that he was John the soul wave, mortal man, as well as John the ocean of spirit, immortal man. John, the wise man, lost the consciousness of his separation from God only as the awakened soul wave loses the consciousness of its separation from ocean spirit. Man's individuality as an existent man's individuality as an existent entity can never be erased from him. In the ordinary death in bondage, the soul of man merely changes its residence, and in the final death in freedom, the soul expands into spirit at home in infinity. I need to take a quick drink. The deep truths of the Gita should not be looked upon as metaphysical abstractions, but should be applied in daily life, particularly during those times when the cosmic delusion presents sickness physical torture, the experience of ordinary death, morbid thoughts of impermanency of the body, one should strongly counteract these negative suggestions by remembering the truth that the self is reflected spirit immortality, ever itself and free from the whims of change. Thus does the Bhagavad Gita emphasize the following qualities of the self. It is unborn, though born in a body. It is eternal, though its bodily dwelling is impermanent. It is changeless, though it may experience change. It is ever the same, though in a long pathway of reincarnation which ultimately leads to God. The soul appears in countless forms. The soul is not slain when the body dies, and even when the soul returns to spirit, it does not lose its identity, but will exist into everlastingness. Verse 21. How can he who knows the self be imperishable, everlastingly permanent, birthless, and changeless, possibly think that the self can cause the destruction of another? O Partha, Arjuna, whom does it slay? That person whose vision is in the spiritual eye beholds the true nature of the soul, and thus, through direct perception, is absolutely certain that the self is immutable. Above birth and death, change and annihilation, such a yogi sees the indestructible beam of spirit as the cause of the formal life and death in the cosmic dream pictures of being, and thus cannot consider himself as the extinguisher of life, or even as the indirect cause of extinction of life in another. When killing is morally justified, the moral interpretation is that in a material struggle wherein virtuous people without provocation are attacked by vicious people, it is not unrighteous for the good people to defend themselves. If the latter, in the course of protecting their innocent women and children, should slay some of the invaders, such action is not incompatible with the laws of virtue. Krishna points out that, although the physical bodies of the wicked people are slain, their souls cannot be destroyed. Of course, this should not be used as an argument to kill wicked people, but a soldier, for instance, who is defending his country righteously, protecting helpless persons, may console his conscience about killing the enemy by realizing he is the instrument and not the real author of the destruction of wicked beings. Even on the battlefield, he should feel he is not the doer, but that all things have been ordained by nature and God. He must not think that he slays or that God slays, but that the karmic forces of evolution have evicted the invaders from their bodily fortresses to re-inhabit other residences in which they will have a new opportunity to learn necessary lessons. Above all, the soldier should realize that all living is a mock battle between life and death, and that those who are killed in a battle are not really dead, and that those surviving are not really living, since man in his ordinary state is separated from God, the only life. That's a very good point. In a dream, one may behold a battle between the righteous and the wicked, and may witness the killing of the evil by the good. On waking from the dreamer will realize that the killing of the vicious people and the surviving of the righteous were both an outcome of his interior imagination. There was no actual destruction. Similarly, Krishna told Arjuna that the battle between his righteous relatives and his wicked ones was nothing but a struggle witnessed by Arjuna in a state of cosmic delusion, in which he was spiritually asleep or not yet awake in wisdom. Krishna reminded Arjuna that the cosmic consciousness of all-pervading spirit should be retained within himself under all circumstances, whether during a physical or an inner battle or any other experience. Metaphysical import of verse 21. The stanza conveys also a deep metaphysical lesson. The soul, Krishna says to the ego, Arjuna, quote, "O my lower self, you must lift yourself to my plane of higher soul consciousness. Even if you destroy the wicked attachment of the senses, you are foolish to think that the senses themselves will be destroyed. Your higher self only purifies the lower self. It will not destroy it." Unquote. The preceptor is telling the student that even if the devotee slays sense pleasures by self-restraint and renunciation, or causes them to be slain by soul force and deep meditation, he can nevertheless lift his consciousness to the plane of wisdom and perceive that nothing has been destroyed. All things are immortal, thus not even the senses of human beings can be killed or annihilated permanently. They only pass through a process of change. When sense pleasures are routed by self-control, their forces are at first inhibited, suppressed within. The devotee's continued spiritual actions then cause the self to transmute them to a finer state for the sensing of higher bliss. For example, if a person is greedy and eats too much, he may suffer from indigestion. If by self-control he abstains from overeating, he is initially only suppressing greed. But if he transmutes his greed for physical food into a greed for continuous communion with God, he does not destroy his excessive appetite, but changes it from an evil agent into a medium for good. When a man begins to slay his temptations and desires for material comfort, he should not condemn himself as a cruel tyrant, a joy killer. Nor should he label the divinity within him as the devourer of sense pleasures. As the devotee gradually destroys his evil inclinations and feels desolate without those pleasures, he should console himself with the thought that his pleasure-loving experiences have not been destroyed. They are in a process of transformation, to be lifted through meditation from the plane of misery to the joyful plane of God attachment. The devotee is therefore justified in transmuting his evil desires. He does not support or kill them, for that would make him a mental fossil. On the contrary, it is through the thirsty mouth of transmuted desires that he drinks the immortal nectar of God bliss. Verse 22, just as an individual forsaking dilapidated raiments dons new clothes, so the body-encased soul, relinquishing decaying bodily habitations, enters others that are new. As it is common practice for a human being during a lifetime to change his attire many times, so it is a habit of the eternal soul during its wanderings on the depth of delusion and mortal desires to cast off karma-worn bodies for new ones. As a person is glad to throw away worn-out, useless clothes for new garments, so should an individual rejoice and feel it just as natural to change a disease-torn or karmically outdated body for a new one. This stanza refers to the doctrine of reincarnation. Its lines remove the gruesome conception of the danse macabre, in which a motley crowd of human beings is led to a chasm of destruction. Death is here described as nothing more than the discarding of a worn-out garment for a new one. When the body becomes diseased, old, or karmically useless, the undying soul forsakes it for a fresh disguise. And that's one of the reasons I did a audio book on the journey of souls, which is a fascinating book about a psychotherapist who was not a religious guy, but he used to use hypnotism to help people. And he discovered this little spot before the person was born and after they had died. So it's an interesting audio book. I wanted to kind of lay that out before I did any of these other ones because I thought it was pertinent for the information. The stream seems to be going in and out again. So continuing, the doctrine of reincarnation. A stage director sends his players, and it was, interestingly enough, that book, the way that they talk about the spirit world and the whole purpose of what's going on and, reincarnation, as far as what he can pull out of people, has a lot of similarities to what this book has to say as well. So continuing, a stage director sends his players in new costumes to play various characters on the stage at different times. Similarly, the immortal cosmic director sends soul actors made in his image to play the parts of numerous incarnations on this stage of life. The actors, costumed variously, look different in each new role, yet remain themselves unchanged. Costumes and makeup disguise an actor and identify him with a particular role. The actor can even be changed from man to woman or vice versa. Similarly, when a soul changes its fleshly costume, it is no longer recognizable to those who were familiar with his identity in a previous life role. Only masters who can peer behind the stage and watch the changing parts and disguises recognize individual souls from one lifetime to another. No matter their different raiment, the eyes, facial features, and bodily characteristics reveal a certain similarity to the soul's costume in a former existence. To the master who knows how to read those signs, he sees truly that death is but a change of attire in an uninterrupted continuity of immortality. The lifespan or durability of a physical body in any one incarnation is ordained by the law of karma. The law of cause and effect govern human actions. According to the natural order of evolution, the body should mature gradually over a period of many years, and then, like ripened fruit, fall voluntarily without resistance from the tree of life. Transgressions against God and nature in the present or in past lives may, however, cut short that normal span by disease or accident, or virtue also may win the soul in an early release. In every case, the bodily dwelling is fashioned and destined to best serve for each lifetime the self-created karmic pattern of the indwelling ego-identified soul. Spiritual understanding of death. A delusion-steeped individual considers, in practice if not in theory, his body, family, and position as invulnerable. Therefore, at the sudden advent of death in the family, he is shocked and bewildered. Not understanding the difference between the immortal soul and the changeable mortal body, he is stricken with grief and horror when he witnesses death or sees himself nearing it. He finds it very difficult to maintain mental balance when confronting the seemingly cruel death, arriving like a tyrant to mar the harmony and peace of life. Usually it is not difficult for an individual to give up an old garment when he has the prospect of a new one, but some persons are so deeply attached to their possessions that they are loath to discard even worn out but highly prized clothing. Similarly, ordinary mortals, no matter what wisdom is offered them, grieve when they have to give up their much loved bodies. Because of the ordinary body bound individual is lacking in the divine inner let me start that over. Because of the ordinary body-bound individual is lacking in divine inner assurance of the continuity of life and has no recollections of the countless times he, the soul, has walked in and out of the portals of birth and death, he is full of fear as well as grief at the approach of death. Very good point. As children fear the possibility of meeting ghosts in the dark, so some people are afraid of the unknown awaiting them beyond the door of death. As frightening ghost stories are told by people with strong imaginations, so death is depicted by ignorant men as gruesome and terrible experience. And in sleep, every night an individual discards the consciousness of the tired body, mind, and so finds peace. In the greater sleep of death, a man forsakes the disease-born body and the attachment-corroded mind for a restful state of joy. And that's definitely represented in that Journey of Souls book. Death is an ecstasy, for it removes the burden of body identification. From joy people are born, for joy they live, in joy they melt at death. Death is an ecstasy, for it removes the burden of the body and frees the soul of all pain springing from body identification. It is the cessation of pain and sorrow. Though death is often erroneously associated with a state of suffering, the physical tortures of disease are far worse than the liberating experience of death. Often the consciousness passing out of the old body at death feels a wonderful sense of release and peace. Quote, "So this is death. Oh, how nice. It is not at all as I thought. I am life apart from the sensitive, troublesome body. God's anesthetic for death has removed me from all physical pain," unquote. And that's, again, definitely reflected in that book, the Journey of Souls book, in which you can find on my channel if you want to listen to it, or you can buy a copy of it. For a time, there may linger a sense of mental suffering of losing the physical body and of parting with loved ones. Quote, "How can I leave those whom I had thought were mine?" Unquote. There is then a gradual diminishment of the memories of earthly existence. Ordinary persons enjoy the rest of the peaceful death sleep in the astral heaven. Virtuous souls alternate sleep with wakefulness in the land of blissful freedom and beauty. Devoid of the harsh, often destructive clashes of gross matter, these virtuous astral beings move freely and at will in bodies of light through endless tracts of rainbow-hued densities of luminosity that form the multivaried life-tronic landscapes, scenes, and beings. Wow. Again, Journey of Souls book. That's exactly how the spirit world is essentially described in that book. Oh, that's crazy. Their very breath and sustenance are rays of subtle life trends that time and again, determined by their karma, their mortal inclinations, transgressions, and latent material desires, draw them back into new physical embodiments. Yep, and like I said, a Journey of Souls, each soul has a different color hue, which tells you what kind of, level they are sort of ascending to. Interestingly enough, those same colors are, the same colors of representing the chakras. So, interestingly, as the desire for life brings the sleeping man to the state of wakefulness, so subconscious desires for a lost physical body and for the earth environment act as vibratory attractive forces that re-embody the soul again within a mother's womb. Meditation frees man from attachment to the body. A bird long confined in a cage may return to it even when set free. So also a man much attached to bodily existence desires to return to a physical form even after being released by death. Long imprisonment in a cage makes the bird forget its free home in the skies. Similarly, the soul consciousness of man confined in the bodily prison through many incarnations forgets its free blessed home in vast space. It takes a long time, many incarnations of right action, good company, help of the guru, self-awakening, wisdom, and meditation for a man to regain his soul consciousness of immortality. To reach the state of self-realization, each man must practice meditation to transfer his consciousness from the limited body to the unlimited sphere of joy felt in meditation. By continuous unity with spirit in samadhi, and by non-attachment to the body, and the devotee realizes the body as a temporary place of confinement. He looks forward eagerly to return to his home of everlasting blessedness in spirit. Devotees who are not rudely hurled out of the flesh by death, but who depart in conscious dignity through meditation acquired power, find their way back to oneness with omnipresent bliss. Swami Pranabhananda, an exalted disciple of Lahiri Mayasaya, who was about to transfer his soul from the limitations of the physical body to the omnipresent kingdom of spirit, found his disciple crying, quote, "Beloved ones," he said consolingly, "I have been long with you, serving you with joy of divine wisdom. Please don't be selfish about your loss in me, but rejoice that I am discarding the prison house of my body by having worked out my term of karmic obligation. I go now to reclaim my kingdom of omnipresence to meet my cosmic beloved." So saying, he blessed the devotees and, practicing the advanced technique of Kriya Yoga, consciously left his body. Verse 23, no weapon can pierce the soul, no fire can burn it, no water can moisten it, nor can any wind wither it. Immutable ever of the finest vibrations of spirit bliss, this soul cannot be touched or harmed by anything of grosser vibratory quality, neither by cruel thrusts of weapons, nor hungry all-consuming flames, nor can liquids drench or drown it, nor defile its lips, which quaff only immortal drink, nor can the stoutest wind render it dry unto dust, nor withholding take away its breath of life. The spirit differentiates its manifestation in creation in two sets of distinct different attributes, the invisible soul and its power of life, mind, and wisdom, and the visible forms of vibratory body and matter. By the use of the fine vibrations, the spirit created the soul, intellect, mind, life, and by grosser vibrations, body, kinetic energy, and atomic matter. The quote-unquote weapons of earth or solids, of fire or energy, of water or liquids, of air or wind, all these constitute gross vibrations. The soul, the individualized reflection of spirit, is made of a quote, vibrationless, unquote, or reactionless vibration of joy. The immortal, omniscient, omnipresent, ever-new bliss of spirit. It cannot be disturbed by the gross vibrations of solids, liquid, air, or energy. Ice collides with ice, water dashes against water, energy is matched against energy. But stones cannot impinge upon the finer vibratory elements of air or fire. Similarly, gross vibrations of matter, or atomic stones, quote-unquote, cannot in any way impose their crudity on soul consciousness. Gross and fine vibratory manifestations are both not but one dreaming consciousness of spirit, expressing through its individualized dreaming consciousness, the soul. Even as God creates on a cosmic scale, the consciousness of man in the dream state can create individualized personalities, or quote-unquote souls, will, thought, and feeling, and also the appearance of bodies, solids, liquids, gases, and energy. The man's dream might depict a battle with terrible weapons, or show the devastation of floods, fires, or storms, but none of these affect the inner ego consciousness of the dreamer. He is not hurt or destroyed by any dream object or weapon, water, fire, or energy. Neither is the soul affected by its cosmic dream-created objects of solids, liquids, wind, and fire. Just as the dreamer is untouched by his dream, so the soul, one with spirit, is unaffected by the objects evolved and vibrating out of the divine dream consciousness of the dreamer's spirit. The acquired soul becomes conscious of its oneness with spirit. When the physical consciousness of man changes by meditation from delusive dreams to the divine wakefulness of soul consciousness, he beholds all solids, liquids, energies as a play of forces, as dream images floating in the mind of the cosmic dreamer. Then he knows that in reality the dream sword cannot slay the dream body, nor is anything able to harm or destroy him. No matter how devastating the happenings of his dream, the dreamer is never hurt by them. He finds himself safe after the dream is over. Similarly, the human soul dreamer may be frightened temporarily by his experiences during his dream of life, but when he wakes in God, lo, he is safe and sound. Verse 24. The soul is uncleavable. It cannot be burnt or wetted or dried. The soul is immutable, all-permeating, ever calm, and immovable, eternally the same. The mysterious soul abides forever, changing never, even when the bubble of cosmos melts in this spatial ocean of infinity. The subtle soul secretly sleeps in every blade of grass, in every nook of creation. The soul hides in the honeycomb of atoms. Thoughts cannot ruffle it. It loves to live in the grottos of change, ever steadfast and immovable. It never dreams aught but eternity. In the previous stanza, the Gita proclaims that no outside objects, whether weapons, fire, water, wind, can affect the soul. It now further explains that the soul itself possesses those mysterious qualities of self-conscious existence that are not vulnerable to any phenomena. Every man is a soul and has a body. Though through delusion he constantly finds his soul identified with the body. Thus he ascribes to himself all the bodily limitations. It is the body that can be cut, burned, wetted, dried, hurt, made restless, moved from one place to another, yet able to occupy only one place at a time because it is circumscribed by a small space and it is short-lasting. So the individual identified with the body thinks that it is he who is thus afflicted and then subjected to the final indignity of death. The man of self-realization, on the other hand, knows himself to be the sole, omnipresent, eternal, ever undisturbed in the largest and tiniest caves of vibration. The paradox of delusion is possible because man, as mortal, is a mixture of the changeless soul and the changeable body. If he wants to avoid permanently all forms of misery, he must learn soul identification. By body identification, man has to suffer incarnations of soul oblivion, undergoing numerous rebirths and their attendant miseries. No matter how much one has been meditating, if he still becomes overwhelmed with bodily suffering or is afraid of disease or death, he has advanced little and has realized little. I hate to say it, but it's kind of true. The aspirant must meditate deeper and deeper until he can attain ecstatic communion with God and thus forget the limitations of the body. During meditation, he must not only think, but realize that he is formless, omnipresent, omniscient, far above all bodily changes. Every advanced devotee during ecstasy realizes omnipresence, omniscience, and ever-new joy of spirit. After coming out of ecstasy, he should try to retain in the conscious mind those experiences of spirit. Human consciousness thus becomes expanded into cosmic consciousness. And yeah, I mean, all this stuff is definitely makes a very valid point about, meditation and where it can take you. But also, if you don't really have the right, how would I say it, intention behind any of this stuff, like you're not really going to go anywhere. And that's that's one of the tough things about the human mind and consciousness, and we're so many different people, and each one of us has like an endless amount of life that we've gone through that has formed us and given us all these ideas that we carry around with us. As the other book, the 112 ways of yoga, they call vikalpas. The thought constructs that we carry around with us and hold on to, that end up being bad just because, in general, it's just it's a hindrance in a lot of ways. So continuing, okay, so verse 25, the soul is said to be imponderable, unmanifested, and unchangeable. Therefore, knowing it to be such, thou shouldest not lament. Before the sparks of creation blinked their luminous eyes, before the cosmic dream took form, the soul resided ever awake and unmanifested in spirit. Before the spirit spumed its thought waves, the soul remained in its bosom, unthinkable by thought, undisturbed by change, and when spirit cast forth its dream of universes, the soul dreamed dreams of body-covered forms. Still, the soul remains the same. Anyone who, espousing this truth, knows the soul to be the image of immortal spirit, should not behave in a contradictory manner and foolishly lament, thinking the self to be vulnerable and destructible with the afflicted and perishable body. The soul dreams the existence of the body. A metaphysical controversy arises when the Bhagavad Gita speaks of the soul as unmanifested while it is apparently manifested in the body of every individual. This paradox can be explained by analyzing the dream state. If John dreams that he has become a fabulous giant catching wild elephants and holding them captives in the palm of his hand, his dream consciousness undergoes a temporary change. But when he wakes up, he finds that his essential ego, or quote-unquote John, consciousness has remained unchanged by the absurd dream experience. The essence of this consciousness was aloof or unmanifested in the dream, and the dream thoughts were not aware of the conscious of true John consciousness. The soul similarly dreams the body and ascribes the dream ego inherent in it all the dream body states. When the man enters dream when the man enters deep dreamless sleep, however, the soul temporarily forgets all its dreams about the body and the world and remains locked up in its true nature of bliss. Thus, even during the period of delusion, throughout which the soul has daydreams about the body, the soul itself remains unchanged, unborn with the dream. The dream comes and goes, the soul is changeless, the flowers of many lives successfully come and go, and the soil of the garden remains the same. The body emanating from the soul is not conscious of the soul, but the soul is aware of the body. Just as a person can watch through a screen a crowd of people in front of him without himself being seen by them, so a soul, through the screen of intuition, watches all its thoughts, but the enlightened thoughts cannot know the soul. This is why the Gita speaks of the soul as imponderable beyond thought. The quote-unquote I, or ego, the dream projection of the soul and the subject of the objective dream, is what thinks and uses its power of sensation to know and relate to the dream of material creation. Thus, thought and sensation are not a part of the soul, but are the experience of the ego consciousness in the dream. Quote-unquote thinking is inseparable in concept from the one who is doing the thinking and the object about which he is thinking. It thus involves the subjective and objective consciousness as well as the thinking process itself. One knows he exists because of the confirmation of his thoughts and feelings that it is so. But what of a person in deep sleep or absolute calmness, in which even if for just an instant there is neither thought nor feeling, nor is he unconscious, that is, without any consciousness? He is not non-existent at that time, but his existence is without the consciousness of ego and without the support of thinking, quote, I exist, unquote. This fragmentary, quote, moment of truth, unquote, is intuition, fleeting because undeveloped. Right, it's fleeting because it's undeveloped, yes. It reveals momentarily the presence of the soul, which exists above ego and its instruments of thought and feeling. Thoughts and sensations are like searchlights. They throw their rays in front on material objects. They do not reveal the soul behind them. Intuition is like a spherical light with rays on all sides, revealing the soul and also its outward projection of thoughts and sensations connected with the ego. Intuition is the bridge between the soul and the ego's thoughts and sensations. If one can, for a sufficient length of time, remain unidentified with thoughts and sensations, and without being unconscious, he will know through the development of intuition the nature of the soul. When one is thus perfectly calm, neither thinking or sentient nor unconscious, yet knowing he exists, a keenness of joyful being in which the thinking, thought, and thinker have become one, unity of the knower, knowing, and known. Therein is the soul's consciousness. And fascinatingly enough, that's very much how quantum physics has been shown to work as well. The observer and the observed have a direct correlation to each other. So, just throwing it out there. And I know some people don't think that that's a legit science. I'm not sure why, but I think it's pretty legit science myself. I've been studying it for years. So, from this unmanifested aboveness, the soul, the individualization of the creator, projects those forces that create the bodily form and the ability to experience through that image. Just as the light falling on the movie screen produces many motion pictures, so the, quote, ray, unquote, of the soul coming from spirit produces a picture of the body on the screen of human consciousness and of space. A person watching motion pictures on a theater screen may take his attention away from them and look up. He will see over his head a transparent beam of light in which there are no visible pictures whatever. It may therefore be said that the electric ray that produces pictures on the screen is unchanged or unborn, even though the pictures emanating from it change and are born from it. When a man is identified with his body, he feels nothing more than the sensations of sight, smell, taste, touch, sound, weight, movement. If by meditation he withdraws his consciousness within, he finds a silent light, finer and subtler than X-rays, the ray of the soul coming from the spirit, projecting the picture of the body on the screen of human consciousness and of space. Through his eye of intuition, the devotee perceives this soul ray. In it is no body with its various complexities, yet it is producing on the screen of human consciousness the changeable picture of the body. The body is not matter, quote unquote, but it is but is composed of several forces emanating from the soul's ray. As the movie being creates pictures on the screen by passing through a film that differentiates its light into forms, so the ray of the soul passing through the film of Maya, delusion, is differentiated into the various creative forces that become the body and its inherent powers of consciousness and life, ego, mind, life force, and so forth, that can enable it to act in and react to its environment. Modern science is moving closer to the truth and acknowledging the body to be an expression of electromagnetic waves. And yeah, this came out in the 1950s, I think. Pardon me, I need to take a quick drink. Yeah, a lot about what he just said is very much represented in quantum physics and a lot of the stuff that they've been discovering, over time and getting further and further along. I saw one article the other day that I think I might be covering on this channel at some point. Continuing, God sent man to earth to be entertained by the bodily dreams, not to obscure his consciousness of immortality by being identified with the body. It is therefore foolish for one to grieve about the bodily changes of which the soul, the self, is changeless witness. The advanced student should meditate deeply until his thoughts become dissolved into intuition. In the lake of intuition, free from the waves of thought, the yogi can see the unruffled reflection of the moon of the soul. Forgetting his dreams of the body, he knows that the soul exists behind the screen of thoughts and is therefore unknown to them. When the yogi perceives the soul as made in the image of spirit, he knows himself to be unchangeable, unmanifested, ever calm, like the spirit. All devotees should meditate and interiorize their consciousness until they realize the true nature of the soul. Verses 26 and 27. But if thou dost imagine this soul incessantly to be born and to die, even in that case, O mighty armed Arjuna, thou shouldest not grieve for it, for that which is born must die, and that which is dead must be born again. Why then shouldest thou grieve about the unavoidable? Quote, but if delusion's dream makes you think of the self as constantly modifying itself with its change of mortal residences, even then, O devotee Arjuna, you should not allow yourself to sorrow. You who are mighty armed with the mental power and self-control should perceive the uselessness in lamenting what is unavoidable, a state of one's own making. For the deluded self that is enamored by its cosmic dream bodily residence must be prepared to undergo through the magic potion of karma. The nightmares of bodily births inevitably pursue by bodily deaths and dreams of physical dissolutions followed by physical manifestations. Unquote. Overcoming fear of death. The greatest dread of ordinary man is death, with its rude, I agree with that 100%, with its rude imposition interrupting fortuitous plans and fondest attachments with an unknown and unwelcome change. The yogi is a conqueror of the grief associated with death. By control of mind and life force and the development of wisdom, he makes friends with a change of consciousness called death. He becomes familiar with the state of inner calmness and aloofness from identification with the mortal body. However, when the aspiring devotee persistently but only absent-mindedly meditates, seemingly without making progress, he cannot always maintain that mental neutrality. Then, like the ordinary man, he is sometimes haunted with the desire to avoid his inevitable death, severing him from familiar amours and memories, and his corollary of rebirth in which he has to start all over again in a slowly developing new form, among new faces, in new surroundings and new circumstances. If through delusion the devotee still feels himself, the soul, somehow inextricably linked with a perishable body, it is nevertheless foolish for him to grieve. So long as the soul is compelled by karma to be imprisoned in the chambers of births and deaths, nothing is gained by succumbing to grief. It is more profitable and in keeping with his true nature for the devotee to concentrate in a positive way on destroying the subconsciously stored prenatal and postnatal reincarnation-making impulses by exercising his will, force, and determination, and by identification of his mind with the blissful soul. It is senseless to bemoan the operation of universal laws. According to the law of cause and effect, the soul is destined to change its mortal residences. Once the soul has been caught by Maya, or delusion, it must occupy a series of prison houses of births and deaths to fulfill its desires to pay to the justice of cause and effect the debts incurred by its own actions. There is no use in lamenting. Rather, man should take practical steps to try in every way to extricate himself from all earthly attachments and bodily identification by tuning in with spirit in meditation, and thus parole himself from the mortal prison into the free world of immortality. And personally, just a quick break here for my own personal thought, I mean, I think this is essentially the real message that Jesus tried to bring to people before he all got screwed up. But I think one of the things that he brought to the table was the idea of, forgiving and forgiveness, but not just in the physical, materialistic way, like, oh, I forgive you because you hurt me and I'm being the better person. It's has more to do with karmic forgiveness in a lot of ways. You lose any attachments to the things that happen to you, and so therefore it's the thing that you have to forgive and the person that you forgive. It's all just wiped off, and you can live a life of you'll never think about it again, other than actually end up appreciating the life lesson that you learned. So continuing. The average person suffering from ignorance and material attachment lives a narrow life. He is born, he marries, and he dies. He must unavoidably repeat the same experiences until, by meditation and identification with spirit, he gains eternal freedom. Once the immortal soul loses its body identification, it is free. The true pragmatist, eager for the quote-unquote results, will therefore spend time in deep meditation rather than waste his life occupied in nothing more than trivial material pursuits and vague speculations about the wheels of births and deaths. And I'll say this too, I think it's interesting, people looking for results and I mean, it is a process, it does take time. However, how can I explain this? You get to the point where, when you spend time in quiet meditation, you will get to a point where your daily life, you're doing all kinds of whatever else, you start to think about it, and it's just kind of sitting there floating. Let's just say at the front of your mind instead of the back of your mind. Let's say the front of your mind, where that little third eye is, right there, and there's just little things that constantly. It's almost like a pulsation. It's like the closer you get to that feeling, the more you sort of wakingly are meditative in that way. And I'm going to go into that in a whole different video associated more with the Shaivan or Shiva style philosophy, and which we'll be going afterwards, because they're similar but they're different, and they definitely have things that we should be going over because they're both important, because they're different from each other in their own ways. But again, I believe that a lot of these things are different because we're all different and we don't connect to the same things. However, that's why so many religious truths universally are the same in religions. It has to be explained, and it's different for each one. So I think people who are wise can see through that, and that's why you get the best. That's why you get saints and enlightened people in all religions, and then you get the bastards in all of them too. So, anyways, continuing. Two kinds of birth and death: earthly and astral. There are two kinds of births and deaths: the breath way and the astral way. Human birth is accompanied by the presence of breath, inhalation, and exhalation of the airborne cosmic currents. Earthly death is marked by the absence of bodily breath. The breath-marked birth and deaths are peculiar to the earthly plane of existence. The astral way of birth and death has a deeper meaning. In the physical world, the soul is encased in a fleshly body made of 16 gross elements. After death, the soul is rid of its heavy overcoat of flesh, but remains encased in its two other subtle garments, the astral body of 19 subtle principles and the causal body of 35 ideas or thought forces. Quote, body, unquote, signifies any encasement, whether gross or subtle, which surrounds the soul. When a devotee by divine ecstasy completely identifies himself with omnipresent spirit, he goes out of the three bodies and attains omnipresence. But when a man leaves the physical body in ignorance, he awakens in an astral world encased in an astral body in accordance with karmic law. He lives and develops in the astral for some time, working out some of the past tendencies. At the timing of cosmic law, man again experiences the death, disintegration of the astral body, and is reborn once more in the physical world. I mean, this these couple of lines, you could have just taken this and put this in the back of the book of Journey of Souls, as this is what this book is about. And it's like almost, I mean, it's pretty incredible, actually. At physical death, man loses his consciousness of the flesh and becomes conscious of his astral body in the astral world. Thus, physical death is an astral birth. Later, he passes from the consciousness of luminous astral birth to the consciousness of dark astral death and awakens in a new physical body. Thus, astral death is physical birth. These recurrent cycles of physical and astral encasements are the ineluctable destiny of all unenlightened men. The truth seeker realizes by introspection and self-analysis and by study under a God-realized guru that the universal laws which govern the phenomenal world ordain that the karma-pursued man must undergo this series of births and deaths. The wise devotee does not grieve over his dire fate and difficult future experiences. Rather, he concentrates his utmost powers to destroy those evil karmas by identifying himself with omniscient spirit, ending the cycles of births and deaths. Births and deaths are inevitable for man only during the state of ignorance in which he thinks he is the body and cannot exist without it. Only the man who will not seek the awakening of wisdom and must suffer the nightmares and delusive dreams of birth and death, and the fanciful miseries and limitations attending them. A man through persistent wrong living may suffer from continual nightmares that he is being suffocated and murdered. Only by right living may he disgorge his subconscious mind of those evil impulses which are the sole cause of his nightly hallucinations. A man with an extreme fear of the cycle of births and deaths may dream every night that he is being born as a baby and then that he dies after he becomes an adult. These dreams may continue indefinitely until by wisdom the man becomes free from harrowing fears that are motivating his dreams. The same truth may be applied to the soul. If a man through delusion experiences birth followed by deaths, he must inexorably continue to do so until by wisdom, meditation, discrimination, and ecstatic communion with God, he identifies his soul with spirit. A man awake in omnipresent spirit loses all delusive nightmares. And it's interesting too. So early on in this channel, I read the what was it? The tablets of Thoth. And there is one whole. It's interesting because then some of the stuff that he's talking about in here is sort of covered in that book as well, even in part about how to die, which is kind of similar to the way he talks about in this book. So continuing, verse 28, the beginning of all creatures is veiled, the middle is manifested, and the end again is imperceptible. O Bharata Arjuna, why then lament this truth? The source of the dancing stream of, and this is also right here, what he just said, is represented in the Egyptian mythology as well. The source of the dancing stream of life is secretly hidden behind mists of delusive ignorance. The end of the same silvery stream is also shrouded in mystery. Only the middle part is visible to humans' myopic vision. Why then grieve over a matter no mortal can solve? I take a quick drink. Okay. Every man wonders from what mystery chamber came original man. Birds, amphibians, crustaceans, stones, flowers, rivers, light, magnetism, electricity, worlds, stars, and universes. From what source do they appear on the screen of human consciousness? An engrossing puzzle. What happens to the 2 billion population of the globe, which every century vanishes without a trace? Through history, biology, and other sciences, man learns only about the manifested period of human existence on Earth. No physical science sheds light on either the beginning or the end of that existence, solving the mystery of life. When we see a tray of watches displayed in a shop window, we may note their shapes, sizes, and styles, hear them tick, but we do not see their factory of origin, nor do we know what fate will befall the watches after they have been bought and used by various people. We are concerned casually not only about the middle or present existence of those timepieces. We should look with like equanimity upon the mysteries of life, which seem understandable and comprehensible in the middle, but inscrutable in their source and end. Negative and grief-inducing philosophies inquired mainly about the prenatal and postmortem conditions of man, rejoicing in birth and lamenting the advent of death. Pessimistic philosophers concede the insolubility of the beginning and end of life and surrender neither to conjecture or to blind belief in some dogma about the unknown. The wise, instead, use the precious moments of the present in practicing the laws of concentration, meditation, and self-discipline by which they can contact the Absolute and know from him, if he would condescend to explain the secrets of his eternal kingdom. Human beings endowed with a questioning intelligence are sent to this partially understandable world to do their best to struggle and succeed according to the light of their intelligence. No clear outward revelation is vouchsafed them from regarding the purpose of life or its source or final end. This fact is a clue to the entire mystery. It silently suggests that the search for truth must not be an outer but an inner one. The stage of earth is as well set with food, air, water, and fire. Man has to study nature to his best advantage and to act out his part according to the innate guidance of his intuition and by imitation of his fellow beings. Yes, the great dramatist director of this mystery play of lives on the stage of the earth remains hidden somewhere, everywhere, directing the play of his children actors only through the suggestions of conscious and innate understanding. The drama, though puzzling, is not inexplicable. Even ordinary men tend to reform their lives in some degree when they discover, by the warnings of self-created suffering, that they have not been acting according to the wishes of the infinite director. Devotees who are trying to contact God through the study of philosophy and the practice of self-discipline, yoga, and meditation should not divert their attention, like worldly men, in lamenting about fate, destiny, and ineffectiveness of human reason as a tool in discovering the solution of life's enigmas. I remember occasions in the past when, finding great joy in contacting God by meditation, my mind would suddenly be very curious. Quote, why not ask God for further information about Jesus, Krishna, Shakespeare, or my own relatives now departed from the earth, unquote. When the Lord would not immediately respond to these irrelevant, if not irreverent, inquiries, I would become a doubting Thomas and cast myself into a dungeon of grief. Knowledge of the complete history of the series of incarnations of every man on earth and in heaven, I would later feel remorsefully, would not be worth the temporary loss of the blissful God contact. The devotee must beware of the dangers involved in wandering into the byways of curiosity. Good point. Forgetful of the direct highway to God. Many devotees would have found God and heard from his infinite lips the solution to all puzzles had they not strayed into blind alleys of unsatisfied spiritual or intellectual curiosity. Men should not desire knowledge for the mysteries of God's creations in preference to knowledge of God himself. The true devotee loves God so ardently that he is compelled to manifest himself in the devotional consciousness. The devotee leaves unto God the right to reveal or not reveal the secrets of his kingdom. Even with the best human friends, one does not betray a vulgar curiosity. Eventually, those friends, without one's rude probing, confide fully and naturally all secrets of their lives. And this goes along with the whole idea of non-attachment as well, right? I mean, if you're going to be trying to try to have an attachment to a result of anything you do, or the fruits of any labors that you do, then you're sort of putting yourself in that position by doing things and just for the sake of doing them, because that's the way it needs to be done, and that all things in essence are. All things in essence in life can be looked at as a wonderful, quote-unquote, sacrifice to God, by all works that you do, whether you're building a table or whatever else, like you're creating something for somebody to use and to have joy around and all the, you know what I mean? There's a, it's one of those things where it makes it more difficult because people have expectations, and those expectations are basically built on the fact that this delusive world, it kind of gives you little snacks of expectations and little things where it gives you the things that you want before it takes things away from you, back and forth. So, and yes, I will share something from the chat. Sharing is caring. A wise man said, "God does not answer my questions; He gives me questions to answer." And yeah, and that's similar to It's similar to that Egyptian proverb when it talks about learn how to pose a question. When you can pose a question in which the question reveals the answer, then you have basically reached the end point there. So I think that's a very good point. Let's see here. Yes. Until a devotee's intelligence becomes cosmic consciousness, God cannot convey to man the meaning of creation. How to explain to the highest human faculty reason, which reduces all concepts to cause-effect relationships, the motive of the uncaused God? Human reason cannot grasp the meaning of creation. All created things seem to be explainable in the middle, as we have seen, but are infinite and invisible in the beginning and the end. This mystery should spur man to trace the visible effect of the invisible cause, the spirit. Nothing can be gained by grief about an unknown fate or the unanswered quote-unquote whys, or by negative thought about the limitations of reason. The prevalent philosophies of our era discourage man from seeking in meditation to go beyond reason. Yeah, even more so than ever. The only way to know the beginning and the end of all things is to contact God. The wonderful drama of life, this mystery play, this visible effect of universal existence, could never have come into being without a cause. Having existed, it could not be annihilated into non-existence. Something cannot spring from nothing, neither can something end in nothing. All enigmas can be solved by the development of intuition, the divine medium of communication between God and man. And yeah, and that would include everything in your life. Because once you start to break open that nut of intuition, like that, you crack it open, it does it definitely helps you in more ways than you can imagine. Just in your daily life, like something will happen and you'll just have the wherewithal, peace, and understanding about the whole situation, where you'll know how to act and how to react and what to say, and it's pretty great. It's one of those things. It's the kind of thing where it's a growth, within you, that is not something that just goes away anymore. It's kind of part of you. It's part of how you see how those things kind of work in life in a practical sense. And then you just get better at it. And the better you get at it, the more wonderful it is. So, verse 29, some behold the soul in amazement. Similarly, others describe it as marvelous. Still others listen about the soul as wondrous. And there are others who, even after hearing all about the soul, do not comprehend it at all. Through the instruction of a true guru, the deep-delving devotee with beatific vision beholds the soul as an amazing luminous wonder. Others, diving into the ocean of ecstasy, describe it unceasingly as a marvelous vibratory entity of wisdom. Others, who listen to the wondrous cosmic vibration of Aum, the Amen, feel the soul as an exquisite dream song of the ever-new joy. There are others who have not experienced the soul. Their ears of spiritual perceptions are deaf, unable to grasp its philosophy, even when they repeatedly hear about it. A quick drink. The three modes of perceiving the soul mentioned in this stanza, beholding, describing, or speaking of, and listening about, imply three of the manifestation by which the soul reveals itself: light, beholding; wisdom, describing its wonder; and cosmic sound, hearing, communion with the bliss-imparted cosmic sound of Aum, or Amin. Spirit and soul manifest as light, wisdom, and sound. The spirit and unmanifested state is ever existing, ever conscious, ever new bliss. The soul is a ray of the spirit. The spirit manifests itself as bliss imparted in cosmic light, cosmic wisdom, and cosmic sound. The soul, therefore, is also perceived as blissful cosmic light, cosmic wisdom, and cosmic sound. Through various techniques learned through a true guru, the devotee finds his intuition absorbed in these manifestations of the soul. When yogis develop a deep intuition, they may experience the soul as an amazing mystical light. When devotees feel the soul as a ray of cosmic intelligence, they speak of it in terms of marvelous wisdom. Others perceive the soul as an exquisite audible vibration in the wondrous cosmic sound, or blissful Aum. The superficial truth-seeking seekers remain so engrossed in restlessness that no matter how many times they listen to a wise man's discourse about the soul, they understand him no better than if listening to one speaking a foreign language. It can be safely said that only an advanced devotee perceives the soul as cosmic light or cosmic wisdom or cosmic sound. Intuition bridges the chasm between intellectual and knowledge and realization. Ordinary human beings studying and working with material life are circumscribed in their understanding by their sense perceptions and rationalizing intelligence. With undeveloped intuition, their limited power of intellectuality cannot truly comprehend matters of the spirit even when such truth is expounded to them. Though colossal intellects and famous theologians may be well read about the soul, they may nevertheless understand little about it. And I am going to 100% agree with that. I watch. There's a really great channel called Myth Vision podcast, and Derek, who runs it, is just like he's just an awesome guy. And there's he has all these professors, and he has academia who study a lot of these ancient texts and have these various ideas. And while I really appreciate these people and their knowledge that they bring to the conversation, it does strike me sometimes that as learned they are within their textual and their language and all the things that they have to be experts on, they seem to many of them seem to lack a kind of an esoteric understanding of a lot of the stuff, and it's always kind of weird because that's the whole point of these books. But no, they argue about the textual differences and this and that and whatever else, and that's why it's going to be interesting after we're done with this book and how we look at. We're going to use this method of intuitional introspection into the text, just like Yogananda does, while pulling out all these things. And we're really going to see, like, for instance, in a lot of these old texts, they talk about how God gave this other god a palace, and then this other one had another palace, and what does that sound like? An astral body and a physical body, and these different gods obviously represent different parts of that idea of consciousness. And believe it or not, I mean, it's going to be interesting. That's all I'm going to say. So continuing. On the other hand, even illiterates given to deep meditation. On the other hand, even illiterates given to deep meditation will be able to clearly describe the nature of the soul from their own direct experience. Intuition bridges that chasm between the intellectual knowledge of the soul and actual realization of the divine self. Man, I have a dry throat. Hold on. Soul and spirit and all inner truths can be apprehended only by developing the power of intuition by regular deep meditation. Intelligence and sense perceptions can perceive only phenomena or qualities of the eternal substance. Intuition alone can perceive the essence of that substance. Therefore, it is evident that the culture of intuition by meditation must precede true perception. In the life of every person, two forces of knowledge are operative from birth. One, the power of human reason along with its satellites of sensation, perception, conception, and so forth. And two, the power of intuition. The former is developed through social institutions and interactions. The latter usually remains uncultured, undeveloped because of want of proper guidance and methods of training. In almost everyone, lower forms of intuition now and again express themselves in otherwise inexplicable experiences of quote-unquote knowing, those that come of themselves independent of the testimony of the sense and reason. These intuitive glimpses are so-called hunches, strong inner feelings, premonitions, quote-unquote prophetic, dreams. These are sometimes the crystallized experiences of former birth. For example, certain knowledge about persons or events carried over from the past that have a predictable future and have no great spiritual value. Other such experiences indicate a little capacity for being calm and intuitively receptive, and others indicate just an unusually keen but passive rationality. All power of knowing borrows its ability from intuition. The highest expression of intuition is that by which the soul knows itself. The knower, knowing, and known exist as one. When intuition comes in touch with matter, it passes through the various stages of evolution. As the soul evolves in expression through 5 stages, or koshas, as the various qualities of inert matter in minerals, as life without cognizing power in plants, as consciousness and sense perception in animals, and as intellect and ego consciousness in man, and as divinity in enlightened man, so also the knowing powers of the soul undergo evolutional progress, and refinement through these various stages of soul evolution as unconscious response in minerals, as feeling in plant life, as instinctive knowledge as animals, and as intellect, reason in undeveloped introspective intuition in man, and as pure intuition in the Superman. And so, interestingly enough, the Nazis, for example, they wanted to create the Superman, right? And they delved in a lot of this information, but they were too materialistic to understand what the heck it meant. So they did everything but really, truly, go into the spiritual thing. You know what I mean? Like they did all these, they had austerities, they had all these things, right? But they just did not get it. And it's obvious because if you are a person who is God-minded, you're not going to go around with a huge army and all these other things. And I don't know. It's just fascinating. Like the whole thing about his obsession with the occult is really interesting, and how he just cherry-picked some parts of it and then got rid of other things and just mixed it around. But I will say this: that's not new. That's very ancient. And when we're going to get into more of my presentations, I'm definitely going to show you guys how there just seems to be this pattern going back and forth between these two different ways of let's say controlling religious thought, because there's the way of like you can just give people a philosophy in which they can live by, and then there's the way where you have rules and then you actually have a structure to punish people. And we know which one kind of won out on that one. So continuing, 5 forms of intuition. In man, the conscious awakening of intuition expresses itself in 5 forms, as determined by the effects of the 5 koshas inherent in his consciousness. They are the following. The first form of intuition, the crudest form, is the basic feeling that, quote, I exist with a body and a mind, unquote. This feeling every human being has. This is called the intuition of the Annamaya kosha, the consciousness of existence in the gross or matter plane. When one is limited to sense knowledge or inferential knowledge, he is on the crude plane of intuition. Why is this called intuition at all? Because in every thinking or sensing process, there is the immediate feeling of, quote, minus, unquote. This feeling is a direct awareness. It cannot be given by any mediary in the world. Every being knows that he exists. It is a feeling that is within him. It is a feeling that is with him even in sleep and dreams. This knowing comes from the knowledge or intuition of the ever-conscious soul. The second form of intuition is the pranic energy, the vital or life current that courses through every cell of the body. It is the intuition or immediate knowledge of the pranamaya kosha, the plane of the life forces that create and sustain the body. In the primary form of this intuition, one hears subtle sounds, sees subtle lights, feels subtle sensations, smells subtle fragrances, and tastes subtle flowers. These are not outward sensations. They have nothing to do with the physical sense organs. In the higher form of this intuition, one feels the pranic force in the subtlest way in every part of the body. Intensified forms of the intuition of prana, for example, when the yogi perceives the soul as cosmic sound, as noted in this Gita stanza, depend upon the succeeding stages of intuition. When one is in this second form of intuition known as prana, when one is in this second form of intuitive knowledge, or prana, he has partially or wholly withdrawn his consciousness from the matter plane of Annamaya kosha. The third form of intuition is the direct knowledge of manas, or mind, its effects in combination with other principles of perception and cognition, along with this separate knowledge of the subtle organs of sense. When one has attained this stage of intuition, the attention is not on the matter plane, that is, the body, nor much on the pranic plane, though some action of prana may be involved in the experiences of this state. This is called the intuition of the manomaya kosha, or mind plane. The consciousness in this plane may be worked on by prana, or life energy, and visions are then seen. In this form of intuition, one is not conscious of the outside world at all, or very little, depending on the depth of meditation. In the undeveloped stage of this form of intuition, one may see visions of all sorts, either fitfully generated or voluntarily willed. For some people, it is not under control, and so visions are fitfully generated. For the adept, such phenomena are voluntary and under control of the will. Visions are astral in substance, projections of prana and consciousness as lifeltronic images. Visions experienced by those whose intuition is still in undeveloped stages may be little more than entertaining phenomena, glimpses into the subtle astral realms, distractions eschewed by the serious God-seeker. Meanwhile, meaningful visions having true spiritual value are engendered by the soul and spirit through pure intuition working on prana and the God-attuned consciousness of the devotee for the purpose of elevating him to ever higher spiritual states, as for example, beholding the soul as cosmic light. Yeah, it's crazy. Early on in my spiritual development, I used to work for a company where I used to drive around a city and drop off these parts for various things because it was a kind of a service company for restaurants and commercial things. So they did everything like plumbing, electricity, all that kind of stuff. And I would have these moments of daydreams in the middle of my day. I'm sitting driving around, and I will have a full-on like lucid dream, and then I will wake up and I'll be at the location. And I wouldn't remember anything about the ride at all, and that happened all the time to me. And it was strange because I hardly really ever said this to anybody, but it's one of those things where it's kind of like I can never really explain that. And then I mean now I got to get it, but it was very much all over the place. I didn't remember a lot of them, but like it was strange. And I don't know. If it was really strange, I once drove from the Washington D.C. area to Baltimore in 15 minutes, and I don't remember a minute of the ride. I just remember arriving there, and when I called my office, they told me that it was impossible that I had gotten there. So I don't know. I have no idea. I can't explain that. Anyway, so I'm gonna continue here. Let's see here. Yeah. The fourth form of intuition is the direct knowledge of the operation of buddhi, or discriminative intellect, along with the knowledge of the ego. One in this stage does not feel the whirl of mind, the race of prana, or the weight and confinement of the body. He feels existent above them, an existence without any other adjunct or condition. Though there may remain a doubt in him whether he is knowing his true self or not, this is an intuition of the jnanamaya kosha, or intellect plane. When this stage is high, fully developed, it is called cognitive meditation. It begets keen discernment of truth, manifesting as wisdom. The fifth form of intuition is the direct knowledge of bliss as depending upon no object, mediary, or condition. This intuition of Anandamaya Kosha it bestows all fulfillment of joy, crowning divine experiences with ultimate satisfaction. In this, as in the previous states, the consciousness has been wholly withdrawn from the body plane, or at least nearly so. Only the highest of spiritual beings, very few in this world, have pure soul intuition. Remember that the first form of intuition is possessed by everyone. The other four forms must be developed. These latter four forms of intuition are not wholly separate. They are, as they develop, one form may manifest when others are present, also in some measure in meditation. When the devotee sees subtle light or hears subtle sound, for example, he may have the intuition of bliss mixed with it to some degree. Or when he intuitively feels himself consciously existent without consciousness of the body, as in the intuition of Jnana Kosha, he may have simultaneously the intuition of unending bliss flowing throughout his being. The highly advanced devotee has this intuitive experience. He feels the soul reflected in the purified, adjunctless intellect and ego, and that ananda, divine bliss, is flowing therefrom. Even during the performance of worldly duties, the higher intuition of that spiritual man remains with him in a greater or lesser extent according to his spiritual development. Yeah, that's exactly what I was explaining to you guys earlier. That's good. It's not an impossibility to be able to live your life with this, and almost like a slight tether to that divine bliss, all day long. It's pretty cool, if you can get to it. I mean, I'm just myself dipping my toes into this part of the waters. So, but it definitely has like absolutely helped me in so many ways in my job and just personal experiences and situations, conflicts, all that kind of stuff. So continuing, pure intuition is soul intuition. Knowing the soul by the soul, seeing the soul with the eyes of the soul, so to speak. Here there are no modifications of intuition, as the intuition of intellect or prana or mind or matter. The yogi in this state is above them all, knower, knowing, and known, having become one. He is fully conscious of his true self. This is the real soul consciousness, and in fact, it is God consciousness. For the soul is realized as nothing other than the reflection of spirit. Only the highest of spiritual beings, very few in this world, have this pure soul intuition. And yeah, I think the chat definitely has made a few comments here referring to that exact thing. Some have it at times, and as when in deep meditation. Some are often fixed in it for longer periods, even after meditation. The more one is anchored in this consciousness, the more one feels the whole world to be akin. Stars, earth, planets, animals, man, he feels all to be pervaded by the same soul, which he feels to be himself. When soul intuition intensifies, the yogi remains unbrokenly in that consciousness for a long time, with no desire or effort to hold on to the accoutrements of delusion. Then even his body cage cannot last. He is one with God. Thus it is declared in this Gita stanza that the wonder of the soul, and that it cannot be known by the ordinary or even keen intellect, but only by those who actually perceive it through intuition. Progressively unfolding by the practice of the right techniques of meditation, intuition makes possible the experience in the various manifestations of the soul, and ultimately the realization of oneself as soul, one with spirit. And, this part where he talks about progressively unfolding by the practice of right techniques of meditation and intuition. See, and this part, I just want to make a quick comment on. I'm not against, people dabbling in psychedelics and things like that. The fact of the matter is human beings have been doing this since the beginning of time. So that's just a comment I want to just throw out there. But like one of the things, especially with things like DMT, ayahuasca, things like that, like and other psychedelics too. Like some people, and this is just my experience, some people cannot handle throwing open the Pandora's box like that, and it can really dislodge a person. So if and that's why, like, I always respect the fact that some people get to the same place that I've gotten from a completely different way. And like, I kind of started dabbling around with all the stupid psychedelics. I won't call them stupid because they definitely taught me so much. But in the end, like, I got what I needed from them, and I was able to kind of continue. But there is a there are unfortunately horror stories of people who do take certain things and it really screws them up because, again, they weren't ready. The progressively unfolding of this realization is very important because it doesn't smack you across the face with this crazy experience. But some people, for plenty of people, this is something that they also need. I mean, I'm going to tell you right now, I definitely would not understand certain things on certain levels had I not had my experiences playing with psychedelics. But I say that I'm not going to tell people to go out and do them because it's one of those things where everybody has to find their path. And then, some people don't even know you know what? I'm going to tell you this. Most people have no idea they're even on a path. They're just lost in the woods somewhere. And so, you know what I mean? And it's one of those things. Sometimes the psychedelics jar, they slap you across the face and they're like, whoa, look, there's a road here. If you pull away some of these weeds, or, there's a little path and hey, whatever. So, again, it's like everything. It's in this world of duality, everything has its good and its bad sides to them. You know what I mean? Has its positives and its negatives. It's all about the equanimity in the middle. What can you learn from it? How can you use it to benefit your life in one way or the other? Those are the important things that one should ask themselves when they're on this constant path of spiritualization. How is it affecting you? Can I use this in my actual daily life? Is it, you know what I mean? All things, those are all litmus tests to see whether or not things work. And that's one of the things I always had kind of an issue with, organized religions, is that they're not developing your soul consciousness in the way that they should have been, if that's what their intention was, which I don't believe ever was their intention. But the funny thing is that they throw it in your face all the time. I mean, it's all over the Hebrew and the New Testament Bibles, all the countless clues. I mean, it's just kind of like, why, imagine the kind of world we'd have if people had this kind of ideas we're growing up, and we had these ideas about like, oh, well, if we hurt this person, then what we're really doing is hurting ourselves. And this was more of a societal view of things. It would be interesting. But every time that pops up in history, it gets squashed. It gets squashed people are murdered, everything is just burned or whatever. The Cathars are a really great example of that in southern France, and in the Languedoc area, because all those people were basically practicing the Christian style yoga the way that they were supposed to. And unfortunately, the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation came in and strong armed the lord that was living and controlling that area, and they just murdered tens of thousands of people. So, and it's because these people were following this type of thing, and that's why they were so prosperous. But that was, it's. I'm reading a book right now about it, so hopefully I'll have some information to bring to you guys. But that's a fascinating part of history. And it also kind of plays a little bit on the whole idea that maybe there's 1,000 years kind of taken out of history, and and then they just mashed up a bunch of different stuff. So, but we'll get to that in another video. Verse 30, continuing. O Bharata, Arjuna, the one who dwells in the bodies of all eternally unavoidable, grieve not, therefore, for any created being. As the dreamer remains unchanged even though he nightly witnesses himself participating in different dream fantasies, so the invisible soul, dreaming the bodies of many incarnations, itself remains unchanged, knowing that the bodies of all creatures are spumescent bubbles on God's cosmic dream ocean of creation. There is no cause to lament when any cosmic dream manifested body is withdrawn into the infinite dreamless dreamer. And so I'm going to share something a little personal here. Maybe I already shared it with you guys. I think I may have already. I very much myself have come to this personal conclusion in my own way. Part of it was with exposing myself to certain books and ideas and other things, and like this book is trying to teach us, is through my own spiritual intuition. And quite a couple years ago, I had an uncle who passed away of lung cancer. And nobody knew that he had lung cancer except when they came to visit me with my grandmother, who was also part of this little story. I knew immediately that he was dying, and and I said my goodbyes to him in a way, to where I told him that I knew everything what was going on, and it was a moment. And then when he did die, everyone was so shocked because nobody knew. And I told his daughter, my cousin, that I knew from when he came to visit that I knew what was going to happen, and the thing is like I love my uncle, but that was the first real personal loss, death that I really felt. I really felt this idea that I didn't have to have grief for something that I knew wasn't the end for him. And the same thing happened to my grandmother this past year. She died of the coof or whatever is going around, whatever, or so they say. And the next day I was in deep meditation with her in mind next to my pond, and a little breeze came up out of nowhere and just blew across. Whether it was physical or not, I'm not even sure, to tell you the truth. But I was emulated by the intense smell of the perfume she'd always worn her whole life. And again, I never cried about my grandmother's death, even though she was such an important person to me, because I've come to understand these things. It wasn't the end for her. And the beautiful thing is that she gave me that assurance and that little clue that I wasn't wrong when thinking that, and that. But when I smelled the perfume from my grandmother on meditation, it charged me up with an amazing bliss, just like they're explaining here. I mean, I was blissfully happy and just overwhelmed for days after that. It was really incredible. But that was just my little personal story there, because and then there's stories like that in the sequel to the Journey of Souls book, which is Destiny of Souls. Where it talks about souls that are they're trying to give messages to their loved ones, and I think in a lot of ways, because I've developed my intuition, it had happened so fast for me. So Anyways, continuing, it is natural for human beings to mourn the loss of loved ones, but the Bhagavad Gita points out the proper attitude of mind that will free one from inordinate grief. Let's see here. The life and death, the proper attitude that will free one from inordinate grief. Life and death, pleasure and pain, and all opposites of this world of relativity produce in man distinct states depending on his specific sensitivity. Bereavement over the loss of one's mother may thus differentially experienced by two individuals. The sensitive person, unprotected by a balance of reason, is overwhelmed by his loss, and like one who has taken leave of his senses, he becomes emotionally incapable of even carrying on with his worldly duties. The less sensitive person is only normally affected by his sorrow. He grieves, but life goes on for him. The sensitive man on the battlefield of life has no armor to protect him when he fights the invading hordes of sentiments. He is therefore likely to be overpowered or slain. The average man finds protection to some degree behind his armor of reason. The yogi, the man of perfect equilibrium, is neither hypersensitive nor stoically heartless. During bereavement caused by death of a loved one, he understands and thus feels and appreciates the nature of the loss he has sustained. But inwardly he remains neutral and unmoved because he perceives that the nature of all material things is impermanent, and that it is thus foolish to expect permanent happiness by clinging to material forms and objects. Knowledge is light. It illumines and reveals the nature of reality. Hence the yogi, enlightened by wisdom, is prepared beforehand to meet such changes. Understanding also gives him great sympathy and compassion for those who incur devastating losses without the buffer of wisdom. In India, those possessing spiritual understanding never speak of an individual's death. They would not say, quote, Rama is dead. Instead, they say, quote, Rama has left his body, unquote. The ordinary expression, quote, John is dead, unquote, is misleading and a very saddening thought. It presumes the annihilation of the owner of the body along with the death of the body. The wise do not grieve for a soul who has gone from one bodily residence into another, just as an understanding person does not grieve for someone who leaves one residence to move into another house. Grief is born of ignorance, attachment, and selfish love because the ordinary man sees only the present frame of existence. The universal nature of his true self and all souls is incomprehensible to him, if indeed not untenable. In this time-space capsule of what and who is quote-unquote mine in the known now, when those whom he calls his own are snatched away by death, he rails at his loss, little knowing that in truth there is no loss at all in the limitless scope of the soul's eternal existence. Even while dreaming different forms and experiences, the dreamer's basic consciousness remains the same, unchanged. Upon awakening, it absorbs itself into all the dream manifestations. The dreamer's imagination retains with it all the elements of his dream. Similarly, God dreams many beings through the dreams of countless immutable souls made in his image. In each dream and incarnation, unchanging souls wear new bodily forms to play different roles in God's dream. The new dream image forgets its previous roles, but the soul remembers them all. And God's consciousness forever retains the dream images of all human beings. Instead of helplessly grieving for the loss of human relatives or friends, one should get in touch with God, who, to satisfy the desire of a devotee, can project into instant visibility any vanished loved one. Well, he certainly did that for me with the perfume. Once, while beholding a motion picture about the life of Abraham Lincoln, I became interested in the wonderful acting and noble deeds of this historical hero. I became his ardent friend. Later in the picture, he was slain. I felt very sad. As I got up to leave the theater, the thought struck me that if I waited for the return, I could again see his noble living presence. At the start of the second showing, I was as pleased to behold him moving and laughing as if he had indeed been resurrected. I kept on watching the show until it was very near time for him again to be slain. Then I left the theater precipitately. In my memory, he is still living. True devotees may successfully pray to God to show them the cosmic motion picture manifestation of their quote-unquote dead loved ones. All persons, being the materialized thoughts of God, are at last again dissolved in his consciousness, but can never be annihilated. God can manifest those beings at will. This is how Elijah and Moses appeared to Jesus Christ, and how Lahiri Mayasaya appeared and appears before many of his devotees on earth. Some waves are on the surface of the ocean, and some waves retire into its bosom. But in either case, the wave and the ocean are one. Similarly, human beings who are floating in, quote, life unquote, on the cosmic bosom or who are hidden within it through, quote unquote, death, are equally at home in the eternal sea. Realizing that the nature of the soul is immortality, human beings will not unwisely grieve about others' deaths. When a being is gone from earth, it is almost impossible to get in touch with that form unless one is spiritually far advanced. It is therefore futile to moan helplessly, but if one has spiritual perseverance and patience, he can again see his departed loved ones by first contacting God. In attunement with Him, one can surely see or know about his missing dear ones. The Gita does not teach us to be heartless, to forget friends or obliterate their memory, but to merely to avoid unreasonable feelings of bereavement and useless lamentations. It is not good to mourn ignorantly for loved ones whom death has taken away, and thus send them sad vibrations, or to try to keep them earthbound, or to disturb them in an astral world. And wow, this is very this is explained very much in those Destiny of Souls and the Journey of Souls books. This is this is definitely something that is talked about in those books. So very interestingly, and that was written in 1980 something or 90 something. This was written in 1950 something, to give you an idea. The mother, for example, should not lament long or unduly over the loss of the death of her child. A child may be required to leave the earth for the purpose of a higher education in the astral world, for definite release from physical torture due to an incurable disease, or for certain imperative karmic duties elsewhere. It is God who gives us children and friends. We should be grateful so long as we have them, and grateful for our memories of them when it suits the divine planner to remove them to another plane of existence. Let's see here. I lost my place. A widower might do well never to remarry if in his departed wife he had found satisfaction in his heart for the demands of an ideal divine love. He should always remember her gratefully as one who gave him release through fulfillment from the earthly duties of matrimony. If a man found some happiness with his first wife and married again after her death, he should not forget all the good vibrations he received from his first wife, but should occasionally send messages of goodwill to her in the astral world. Advanced devotees on earth can consciously broadcast vibratory communications to persons who are spiritually evolved in the astral world. Such conscious communication is possible only between advanced souls, but even the ordinary man has the power to waft his weightless thoughts in love towards departed dear ones. The vibrations of good thoughts are never lost, but are a quiet stimulus of joy and well-being to those beloved ones who have gone on to the astral world. The grief of most human beings over the deaths of those close to them is due to selfishness because of a personal loss of some form of service or comfort. Very few people love others without a tinge of selfish interest. That is the nature of human love. Most people grieve not for the beloved, but for their personal deprivement. Wow. Wow. I mean, that is true. Divine love, and this is also expressed in the Course of Miracles when they talk about special loves and special hates. Divine love recognizes all good persons who enter our lives as expressions of God's love for us. Every friend, in the guise of relatives, friends, a beloved spouse who is with us now or who has left this earth, is a medium through which God Himself symbolizes His friendship. To ignore or abuse friendship, therefore, is an affront to God. In all our harmonious relations, we must remember that it is God who is playing hide and seek from behind the living hearts. We should never ignore or forget any kindness or service extended to us by a friend. Ingratitude and indifference wither even the stoutest oak of friendship. Man should not, however, limit the manifestation of God through friendship to only one or a few relatives and friends. All mankind are not only our friends, but ourself. Friends are God in disguise, God and friend behind all friends, God the only faithful lover. Quote, loved ones are taken away not as a punishment, but to teach the law of universal love. God gives us friends and beloved relatives that we may have the opportunity through these relationships to culture elementary love, the first stage of expansion beyond self-love towards divine love. But because man becomes attached to dear ones in a limiting way, the divine law takes them away, not as punishment, but to teach the law of universal love. It is God who appears for a time as a loving son or daughter, or mother, father, friend, or beloved, and it is He who disappears again from view. If karmic bonds are strong, especially spiritual ties, He may come again in relationships with the same souls in different incarnations. And if it is God and God alone who has encased himself as the soul in the many human beings he has created. And when one human being loves another with pure divine love, he sees the Spirit of God manifesting in that person. In order to demonstrate his spirit nature as soul, distinct from the body, one God who exists in all bodies appears in one form, takes leave of another, reappears in new forms, then again disappears. It follows, therefore, that it is not the body we should love, but the immortal spirit within. Those who love the body as self rather than as the tabernacle of the true self are unduly grieved in the end because the body must perish. Those who love the indwelling spirit hold on to a lasting joy because they know the soul is immortal. Death cannot touch it at all. The lover of the body has his eyes fixed on the body and cannot see the immortal spirit within. So when the body is taken from view, his eyes grow dim with tears. Those who learn how to keep their gaze fixed on the souls of their loved ones do not lose sight of them, quote unquote, sight, even when their bodies perish. Hence, that relationship is not marred by selfish grief. Yes, I agree. Metaphysical interpretations of verse 30. And then after this, I'm going to take a little break. On the metaphysical plane of interpretation as relates to the inner spiritual battle of the devotee, Arjuna, an important point is made in this and preceding verses about the inviolability of the soul. The Lord reminds the aspirant of his innate soul power to become victorious over his lower ego nature. Devotees who are addicted to the weakness of their senses and bad habits are not only reluctant to destroy these friendly enemies, but also feel that the overwhelming power of these forces shall surely succeed in the genocide of the soul's divine qualities and aspirations. But though the ego, habit, senses, desires may enshroud man's consciousness for a while, they cannot destroy nor change the soul, nor suppress it forever. Every soul, no matter how dead it seems, nor how deeply buried beneath bad habits of ego consciousness, is able to resurrect itself from the sepulchre of wickedness and prenatal and postnatal weaknesses. The soul is indestructible and untouched and unchanged by its would-be enemies. It only awaits the rallying cry of the determined divine warrior. All right, so I have to take a quick break. My cat needs to get let in. I need to use the facilities, fill my drink up, all that stuff. So I'm going to just leave you guys with the little break screen page. Here we go. And I'll see you in about 5 to 10 minutes or so. Okay, we're back. Let me take that off. Here we go. Okay. Make sure the sound's good. I think it is. Yep, okay. All right, continuing. Let's see here. The righteous battle is man's religious duty, verse 31. Just making sure I can see this. Yes, okay, good. Even from the point of view of thine own dharma, one's rightful duty, thou shouldn't not inwardly oscillate. There is nothing more propitious for a kshatriya than a righteous battle. Behold the, quote, goddess of righteous duty, unquote, as she stands on the sacred altar of life. The spiritual warrior should not hesitate to accept his supreme duty to strive to rout her enemy invaders of ignorance by fighting to acquire wisdom. Nor should a strong soldier nurtured on the lap of his mother country ever waver in protecting her and safeguarding her worthy interests and ideals. Yeah, worthy is the key word there. What is man's rightful duty? Life in man's bodily kingdom is cooperatively served and protected in general by the head, skin, surface, hands, and feet. The feet provide basic labor and service in the form of support and locomotion of the whole body. The surface of the body, including the sense organs, carries on all the business transactions through communication on the outer world with the outer world, and it also is a field tilled and reaped of experiences connected with material life. The hands act as shields to protect the body from harm and govern the body by providing for its needs, care, and welfare. The head, with its mental faculties, provide the intelligence and the spiritual and moral counsel necessary for maintaining a wise and harmonious kingdom of trillions of cells and countless sensations, perceptions, and activities. Man instinctively imitated the archetype of the bodily government when organizing his society. Each nation has its intellectual and spiritual people, or Brahmins, its soldiers and rulers, or Kshatriyas, its businessmen, or Vaishyas, tillers of the soil, and its laborers, or Sudras. By scientists' discoveries of seals, potteries, coins, statues from ancient cities unearthed in Mohenjo-daro and Harappa in the Indus Valley, northern India, India's civilization has been established as far older than that of Egypt. I'm not so sure about that. Excuse me. Because I think that they're actually existing almost at the exact same time period. And I'll be going into that in future videos, in more of the presentation stuff that I'm kind of slowly putting together. Quote, taking us back to an age that can only be dimly surmised as the most ancient civilization on Earth, India is the cradle of all forms of culture. Her rishis found that every nation evolved through physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual states, even as a man passes through the state of physical growth in childhood. Bodily activity governed by restless energy, the emotional state of youth, activities and desires spurred by heightened sense of awareness, and the intellectual and spiritual states of maturity. Reason guided action to meet needs and responsibilities, and ultimately a deepening of consciousness and understanding, wisdom, and spiritual values. What was I going to say? It was, it had to do with this. Oh yeah, the Mohenjo-daro, Harappa civilizations too. Interestingly enough, they don't really have any archaeological stuff from any of the other Vedic gods. It's only Shiva that they find stuff. There's like a really old Shiva linga at one of those locations, and they even found the dancing Shiva on the dwarf with the flames going around him, which, by the way, is also represented in Egyptian artwork. Not just Egyptian artwork, if I'm not mistaken, pre-Mayan artwork as well, but that'll be for another day. Anyways, the sages of India were the first to pattern their civilization after the bodily government. That is why they emphasize the recognition of four natural castes, according to man's natural qualifications and actions. The rishis maintain that the four castes are necessary in proper development of a country. The intellectual and spiritual Brahmins, the Kshatriya soldiers and rulers, the Vaishya businessmen, and the Sudra laborers should cooperate in the successful government of a country, even as the brain, the hands, and the tissues and the feet all cooperate for the successful maintenance and progress of the bodily kingdom. In India, the four castes were originally based on the innate qualities and outward actions of the people. This is important. All had respected and necessary place in society. Later, through ignorance and greed and lust of power, the caste rules became a hereditary halter. Confusion crept in. Unworthy children of intellectual and spiritual Brahmins claimed to be Brahmins by sheer virtue of birth, without a corresponding spiritual stature. Children of Kshatriyas became soldiers and rulers, even if they had no aptitude or skill in arms or capability to govern. The children of the Vaishyas, even without understanding management of agriculture or trade, laid claim to their inheritance as farmers or businessmen. Sudras were confined to menial labor and servitude, regardless of their superior qualifications. This rigid hereditary caste system is defended only by the orthodox minority in India. And interestingly enough, we find this exact same thing playing itself out in the Middle East and in Europe, particularly with the nobility. So you have the kings and queens, and you have our lords, that were the main business people, whatever else, and then all the serfs underneath. And that's something I'm definitely going to be pointing out too as we go back into our history videos. And sharing is caring, says history is a crock, quoting John Levy or Levi. Indeed, it's full of, look at the way the media lies right now in our current system, and don't tell me for a second that, history isn't also rewritten and whatever. I mean, even just with the whole 1619 project stuff that I'm trying to push on people, it's a total rewriting of history right now in our time period. So, take that for what it is. Continuing, quote, a caste system is pernicious also in the West, where, like I was saying, where divisions have been created according to money, color, and race, the breeder of hatred and wars. The Bible says all nations have been made of one blood, that all men, irrespective of color and race, have been made in the image of God, that all men are the children of common parents, symbolically Adam and Eve. The grouping of races according to an Aryan and Nordic superiority over other races is a fiction fostered by races suffering from a superiority complex. The Hindus originally considered themselves as Aryans, or quote-unquote nobles, to be, because that's what that means actually in Sanskrit, just so people understand, to be superior to other nations. In those days, India possessed both spiritual and material power. The Western nations, now materially more prosperous than the Eastern nations, consider themselves as superior. Westerners who profess to follow Christ should follow the doctrine of the brotherhood of man and the fatherhood of God, thus banishing hatred-making, war-inciting distinctions. Wise men like Lincoln try to destroy divisions in the West, as the sages of India are trying to destroy the superficial divisions of caste and class and creed. Yeah, and they're still doing that. Spiritual meaning of the caste system. Apart from divisions of caste and class, there is a spiritual interpretation of the caste system that applies to the natural classes of humanity. Every human being belongs to one of the four natural castes. According to this predominant quality, a slave of the senses is in the Sudra or Kayastha state, Kaya, body, and Stha, attached to. The body-identified state. Often he is a materialist who doubts the existence of spirit owing to his sense of enslavement. Anyone who is cultivating wisdom and weeding out of ignorance is in the Vaishya state, quote-unquote, cultivating the discriminative spiritual state of mind. One who is fighting in meditation the invasion of sense proclivities, instincts, moods, and evils in the body kingdom is considered to be going through the kshatriya, or fighting state of mind, ruling with the power of self-control. He who possesses the knowledge of spirit through communion with God in meditation has attained the Brahman, or spirit-identified state. According to the spiritual interpretation of the bodily kingdom, man as the sense-identified or Sudra state of mind should struggle to recognize his senses as his servants, not his masters. The duty of the devotee who is in the cultivation or Vaishya state of spirituality is to weed out ignorance and to sow wisdom seeds within the field of consciousness. In the Kshatriya state, the spiritual warrior must do his utmost to protect his mental kingdom from the invasion of meditating, disrupting inner forces of ego, habit, and senses. He thus passes naturally into the Brahman state of invulnerability, God realization. This stanza of the Gita has special reference to the duty of a spiritual man who has attained the Kshatriya state. Krishna, the soul, says to the devotee, Quote, O Arjuna, you are in the warrior state of spirituality. Your duty lies in fighting the momentary pleasurable sense attachments of body consciousness. Do not waver. Awake, rouse the soldiers of discrimination and meditative calmness, assemble them on the battlefield of introspection, rout the invading forces of sense attachments. The same spiritual instruction can be applied in everyday life. In a righteous material battle, for instance, one should fight nobly and fearlessly to defend his homeland from evil invading forces, safeguarding the well-being and interests of his countrymen and upholding the ideals of virtual human existence. Verse 32. O son of Pritha, Arjuna, fortunate are the Kshatriyas which, when such a righteous battle has, unprovoked, fallen to their lot, they find therein an open door to heaven. O Pritha, wavering son, a noble-minded warrior should eagerly seize any opportunity to fight for an exalted cause. Those who responded to the call of a righteous battle, one that comes without aggressive seeking and demands fulfillment of karmic law of justice, will surely behold that in that duty a secret door to heavenly happiness. Excuse me. There are two kinds of noble warriors, the soldier of any land who engages himself in a righteous war for the protection of his country, and the spiritual warrior who is ready to use self-control and undaunted endeavor to protect the inner kingdom of peace. No warriors of the spirit should hesitate because of the delusive stratagem of the inner enemy. No dutiful soldier should waver because of the danger to his life or because of the necessary bloodshed. In Krishna's exhortation to Arjuna, he must perform his righteous duty as Kshatriya warrior. The Gita warns man against the temptation to use a metaphysical doctrine of nonviolence as a subterfuge for tolerating the slaughter of innocent people by conscienceless marauders. The doctrine of nonviolence, as taught by Leo Tolstoy and by Mahatma Gandhi, includes resistance to evil. A nonviolent person should resist evil, however, not with physical force, but with spiritual force. Gandhi was a warrior without armor, save the invulnerable breastplate of truth. Nonviolence is passive resistance to evil by love and by spiritual force and reason, without a use of physical force. The nonviolent man maintains that if it is necessary to shed blood in the protection of innocence, then let that blood be his own. If a person spiritually resists the program of wrong to the point of inviting his own death at the hands of his infuriated foes, there will be ultimately less bloodshed in the world. The point has been proven a practical truth in recent Indian history. India's victory of independence from foreign rule through Gandhi's principle of passive resistance. Indeed. Thousands of Gandhi's followers martyred themselves in adhering to the doctrine of nonviolence. On numerous occasions, Gandhi's unarmed followers resisted by non-cooperation a law that they considered unjust. They were attacked and beaten by political enemies. Many of Gandhi's disciples, mercilessly cudgeled, rose again to their feet and calmly pointed to their broken skulls and limbs, urged their enemies to beat them again. Witnesses have testified that this display of nonviolent courage caused many political enemies to throw down their weapons, remorseful at having attacked brave men who, for the sake of their convictions, were not afraid either of maiming or death. And this event that they're talking about, or these events, it was definitely widely covered in the news, and it actually is one of the things that turned the world public opinion against the British because of how brutal they were against these people who had no weapons. They were just passively resisting. And that's one of those things, is that, like sharing is caring is saying, don't turn off your TV, fear not, because, these people, once people really realized that, of course, television wasn't existed at this point, but newspapers were, they were horrified by it, and it woke people up. Just the same thing that happened, during the 80s and 90s with apartheid. They covered it enough to where people woke up to these realities, and they were like, yo, this needs to end. And so it did. But it was through the courageous, nonviolent resistance of these people that made that happen. And realistically, it was truly a miracle that happened in India. Unfortunately, India has got its issues with corruption and all that stuff like everybody else, but is that not human nature? Is that not why we're reading this book, right? So continuing, right to application of doctrine of nonviolence. The doctrine of nonviolence maintains that the sacrifice of one's self teaches one's enemies through the awakening of conscious and the inner urgings of repentance to eschew violence. This premise presupposes that the enemy's conscious is capable of being touched. If you walk into a tiger's cage and start preaching nonviolence to him, his bestial nature, which is unprincipled in the moral standards of man, will cause him to devour you. Utterly ruined your fine dissertation. The tiger learns nothing from the experience unless it be that a fool is an easy meal. The smart crack of a trainer's whip might have engendered a more meaningful conversation between man and beast. Parallelisms can be drawn from accounts of atrocities in the history of man. Though force in itself is an evil, when employed against a greater evil, the lesser of the two evils becomes in this world of relativity an act of righteousness. But this is not a free license to resort to force or retaliation. For example, there is a great difference between a righteous and an unrighteous war. A country may be purposely aggressive and fomenting wars to satisfy its greed. A war so motivated is unrighteous actions by the aggressors, and no soldier should cooperate with it. To defend one's own country against the aggression of another, however, protecting innocents, helpless people, and preserving their noble ideals in freedom is righteous duty. It is best to consult true men of God whenever there is doubt as to whether or not a war is righteous. To condone defensive force in certain circumstances is not to demean the superiority of spiritual power over brute force. Even a tiger in the company of a yogi filled with love of God becomes a pussycat. Patanjali says, quote, "In the presence of a man perfected in ahimsa, nonviolence, excuse me, enmity in any creature does not arise." I need to take a quick drink. Love your enemies is a central part of the teachings of Christ. This is not a sentimental dictum nor a gesture merely to ennoble the giver, but expresses an important divine law. Good and evil are relative opposites in the world of duality. Good draws its power from the pure creative vibrations of spirit. Evil derives its force from delusion. The effect of delusion is to divide, agitate, and cause inharmony. Love is the attracting power of spirit that unites and harmonizes. When man tunes in with God's love and consciously directs its vibratory force against evil, it neutralizes the power of evil and reinforces the vibrations of good. Hate, vengeance, anger, on the other hand, are of the same ilk as the evil being resisted, and so only inflame the evil vibration. Love smothers that fire by denying it fuel. God has shown me many times the power of his love in conquering evil. And I mean, look at the way that the whole intersectionality movement seeks to divide every single type of thing into some other thing, and there's no harmonization of any of that stuff. And it, I mean, you can see the effects of what it does to people, what it's doing to society. That's an unfortunate thing, but it's something that's been in place for, I don't know, more, for a long, long time, let's just say. Because as you divide, you get further from that one spiritual understanding. So just realize that. Continuing, the resistance of evil by good, not by evil, is thus the ideal method for eradicating the plague of war. The use of force down the millenniums has certainly not banished that plague. Jesus said, quote, "All they that take the sword shall perish with the sword," unquote. Yet how many so-called, quote, "righteous wars," unquote, have been fought in the name of that beloved Christ? If one brandishes his sword against his enemy, that act excites his foe to use any weapon he can to defend himself. War breeds war. War can be outmoded by practicing a doctrine of peace in international life. Aggressive wars should be effectively outlawed. War of defense are not wrong, but a far greater achievement is to be able to conquer one's would-be conquerors by non-violent resistance. Jesus would have borrowed 12 legions of divinely armed angels to destroy his enemies, but he chose the way of non-violence. He conquered not only the Roman Empire, but mankind by his love and by saying, quote, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do," unquote. The non-violent Jesus, allowing his blood to be shed and his body to be destroyed, immortalized himself in the eyes of God and man. A nation that can maintain its independence by peaceful methods will be the greatest example and savior to the arming and warring nations of the earth. Gandhi maintained, however, that it is better to resist with physical force than to be a coward. If a man and his family, for example, are attacked by a criminal who levels his gun at them, and the man, being actuated by inward fear, says, quote, "Gunman, I forgive you for whatever you may do," unquote, and then flies away, leaving his helpless family, these actions cannot be called display of nonviolence, but of cowardice. According to Gandhi, a man in such a situation should resort even to force rather than to hide his act of cowardice under a mask of nonviolence. It's an important distinction. To return a slap for a slap is easy, but more difficult is it to resist a slap by love. Any warrior who uses physical force or spiritual power to defend a righteous cause always derives in his soul a heavenly satisfaction. According to the law of karma, a man who dies courageously on the battlefield with a clear conscience attains a blissful state after death and is reborn on earth with a valiant mind and a noble family. A storm creates changeful waves on the bosom of the ocean. When the storm vanishes, it is seen that the waves, far from having been destroyed, have merely disappeared by slipping back into the bosom of the sea. A soldier in a righteous war, confronted with the grim specter of death, has to keep this reality foremost in his mind. There is no death, only a return to the soul wave to the sea. And when righteous people, even indirectly, are the cause of slaying evildoers in a battle, they should not flatter themselves by thinking that they personally have any power of destruction. Evil, by the judgment of cosmic law, writes its own death sentence. The hero and the villain are karmically in the right place at the right time, according to God's view, not man's, for the judgment to be carried out. Applying these principles to the spiritual warrior, when he finds himself in a scene of inner psychological war in which peace and spiritual victory are threatened by sense temptations, he should not waver, but should see in his inner battle an opportunity to conquer his enemy habits, and further, to establish within himself the heaven of permanent happiness. A devotee who tries to conquer his psychological tests and the trials of delusion by the Christ command of his self-control, as Jesus stilled the storm on the sea, will gradually find within himself a permanent state of heavenly peace. According to the spiritual law, the devotee who holds on to the after effects of meditation and who maintains against any trial his inward peace and joy in this life will pass after death to the eternal blissful peace of God. Verse 33. But if thou declinest to undertake this righteous combat, then, having relinquished thine own dharma and glory, thou wilt reap it. Thou wilt reap sin. Let me read that again. But if thou declinest to undertake this righteous combat, then, having relinquished thine own dharma and glory, thou wilt reap sin. Quote, if you refuse the opportunity to fight and conquer the enemies that are threatening your welfare and inner kingdom of true happiness, you will have shirked your righteous duty and sullied the honor of your true self, a sin against the divine image in which you are made. Unquote. The beauty of the Gita is the universality of its teaching, applicable to all phases of life, the path of the warrior in daily life. This stanza instructs the businessman, for instance, that when he enters the spiritual path, he must not become indolent, unpractical, or foolish in his ordinary worldly affairs, forgetting to protect righteously his interests against unscrupulous competitors. He can practice unselfishness without neglecting his own necessary interests. A businessman who, through foolhardiness and false spirituality, declines to fight a righteous business battle will surely lose the glory and the success benefiting his position. By his neglect of business laws, he invites the state, or quote-unquote sin, of uncalled-for losses and failures. Nor should a businessman rob Peter to pay Paul, that is, make money dishonestly in order to use it for philanthropic purposes. One should earn his living honestly and should fight all crafty business competitions that tries to paralyze him. It is possible to be unselfish and non-attached to possessions without supinely permitting others to trample on one's rights. A spiritual businessman who allows unethical persons to crowd him out of existence is guilty of tolerating injustice and thus of permitting evil practices to spread in the business world. In short, nearly every good businessman must be, in modern competitive life, an embattled warrior. Pardon me as I take a drink. Excuse me. The mortal man who tries to subjugate the seemingly uncontrollable proclivities of the senses so trains them that they rejoice in his true happiness and not rebel against it. The self-controlled moral individual does not give quarter to any temptation that militates against the pure nature and true happiness of the soul. And just to go back to this other one here, a spiritual businessman who allows unethical persons to crowd him out of existence is guilty of tolerating injustice and thus permitting evil practices to spread in the business world. Wow, you couldn't describe the modern world better than this and the modern way that business people think and how they act. Continuing, the moral man who tries to subjugate the seemingly uncontrollable proclivities of the senses so trains them that they rejoice in his true happiness and not rebel against it. Oh, wait a minute. The self-controlled moral individual does not. Yep, sorry. Quote, sense-controlled, unquote, is applied to a man who is the slave of his senses. The, quote, self-controlled, unquote, devotee is one who is governed and disciplined by the wisdom of self. The more an individual becomes sense-controlled, the less he is self-controlled. He who has tasted the happiness of a self-controlled life automatically resists the inordinate temptations of the senses. He is a deserter who does not want to battle the wicked cravings of the wicked cravings of the conscious or subconscious mind. He loses honor and virtue and the joy of self-control. Ultimately, he falls to the, quote, sinful, unquote, or sorrow-making pit of an uncontrolled existence. And this is essentially what hell is, right? It's the constant reincarnation in this uncontrolled existence. Just as an automobile with a broken steering rod becomes a runaway from its proper path and falls into a ditch by the roadside, so a man with broken self-control falls into the pit of inner disquietude. To avoid the miserable state of moral derelict, everyone should protect himself against the invaders of false temptations, those that promise happiness but impart misery. Many a moralist encounters an inner psychological battle when companions tempt him to digress from the straight and narrow path of morality. Confronted by unscrupulous individuals with blunt consciousness and poor spiritual judgment, the true moralist should redouble his mental determination to travel in the path of contentment, continuously fighting any temptation that waylays him to prevent his reaching the destination of happiness. Similarly, any husband or wife who forgets to protect the happiness of a moral life together will certainly plunge that relationship into a pit of disharmony and complex sufferings. One's self-controlled happiness must be staunchly guarded against attacks of the wandering hordes of visual, auditory, olfactory, hearing, gustatory, and tactual sensation. Even though entrenched by self-control, one must constantly be on the watch for sudden guerrilla warfare tactics of sense temptations. The mental and moral strength of man becomes successively stronger by valiantly battling every trial and temptation. The law of life offers man the power of resistance in his God-given will and immortal soul qualities. It is his duty to bring out this hidden strength, this divine heritage, and prove himself a worthy, quote, son of God, unquote. And it is a sin against soul progress for a man to lay down his arms of will and self-control and acknowledge defeat when challenged by any kind of trial. And yeah, one's own self-controlled happiness must be staunchly guarded against attacks of the wandering hordes of visual, all this stuff. And it's true, that's just a quick story. My wife and I got into a bit of an argument not too long ago. And in the middle of the argument, I just realized how completely absurd the whole thing was. And I brought my hands together in the middle of it, and she mocked me. She was like, "What are you doing?" Blah blah blah. And said some kind of insult my way or whatever else. And but I needed to ground myself. I needed to pull myself out of it and realize, like, okay, I need to regain that center of calmness and realization. And after that, I was able to actually not take control of the conversation, but essentially I was able to point out the complete absurdity of the whole thing, and therefore ending the argument. But I would not have done that had I not just calmed myself in the moment. I probably, the argument would have continued, and both of us would have thought we were right. But anyways, continuing. That little story just to show you how easily this kind of information and these kinds of concepts, and especially through meditation, because you start to, every step you take, every decision you make, it has endless ramifications of things that you could really never understand unless you spent the time trying to understand it in a deeper fashion, i.e. through meditation and through, spiritual inwardness, let's just say. Continuing. Every spiritual devotee who regularly and deeply meditates realizes that he is the emperor of a kingdom of peace which he himself has won by battling the forces of restlessness. But before the empire has been fully secured, even a veteran warrior will find that he is subject to manifold outer and inner influences that strive to usurp the glorious realm. On such occasions, the spiritual conqueror must advance boldly. Any devotee who refuses to engage himself in a righteous conflict with the suddenly invading soldiers of disquietude and unmeditative moods will lose the strenuous gained honorable, enviable, and unending joy of the soul. The yogi who strives scientifically to unite his soul with spirit through guru-given techniques of meditation realizes that the greatest dharma or protective virtue of the soul is ever new joy. The religion of the soul consists in the manifestation of this true spiritual happiness, gained by constant efforts of deep meditation. After having earned this soul joy by waging many wars with restlessness, the devotee should be perpetually vigilant, never jeopardizing his joyful kingdom by becoming careless and negative during the invasion of cosmic delusion through the channels of sense disturbances. Once ego consciousness has been metamorphosed into soul consciousness, no sense invasion has power. And adepts who have become extremely elated by metaphysical victory over the senses and by the first overwhelming perception of the joy of the soul may forget that the soldiers of restlessness can again rise up and usurp the newly conquered kingdom of peace. Instead of relaxing carelessly on his laurels, the devotee should concentrate on the permanently identifying the mind with the soul's intuition and ineffable peace, that no invasion of senses or subconscious thoughts ever again gain victory. Once the ego consciousness of the body has been metamorphosed by meditation into soul consciousness, no sense invasion has any further power. Until that finality is securely gained, however, the devotee must protect the vulnerable perceptions of the soul's ever-new joy, the firstborn of meditative ecstasy, by manifesting a vigilant willingness to wage a righteous war with restlessness and body consciousness. If at any time he forsakes this duty and surrenders instead to the consciousness of the flesh, he sins against the image of God in which his true self is made. And again, sin is synonymous with error, okay? Just keep that in mind. And of course, the next word is ignorance. Ignorance born of cosmic delusion is the greatest sin, again, error, because it eclipses that divine self and produces the limitations of ego or body consciousness, the root cause of the threefold sorrow of man, physical, mental, and spiritual. Quote, the wages of sin is death, unquote. The unspiritual man living in the sin of ignorance experiences a living death, denied the life of breath of truth realization. He is a dream puppet dancing on the strings of illusion. The yogi, too, reaps the wages of the sin of delusion in the death of his spiritual perceptions, if only momentarily, whenever he neglects his righteous duty to battle in meditation the onslaughts of body consciousness. The devotee must rather demonstrate to the glory and honor of his true self the, quote, Son of Man, unquote, the image of God dwelling in the flesh, his immortal kinship with the beloved Father God. Verse 34, men will ever speak of thine ignominy men will ever speak of thine ignominy. To the man of repute, dishonor is veritably worse than death. The perdurable dark monument of dishonorable action draws criticism from men of the world even for centuries to come. Beware, the valiant spiritual hero betrothed to virtue be not disloyal to her. He who falls into disrepute in the eyes of honorable virtue suffers pangs in life worse than physical death. A life stripped of honor is a living death. A deserter brings disrepute upon himself for failing his country. He is an object of wide derision, stigmatized with cowardice. His unhappy lot is to go through the experience of a living death of world censure and self-recrimination. Death obliterates physical suffering, but a dishonorable act infects the living mind and body. A deserter finds no peace within himself or in society. He is also a coward who permits sense temptations to devastate his bodily kingdom. It requires definite mental resistance and willpower to fight the battalions of strong sensual cravings. A moral deserter finds himself constantly criticized by his own conscience, not to mention the hordes of holier-than-thou worldly people. The moral hero who once reigned as the master of his respectful thoughts undergoes severe mental disquietude when he permits those thoughts to become lax and disobedient. Physical death obliterates from man's consciousness any memory of dishonor, so a life of moral turpitude, fraught with painful memories of a fortified, honorable past, is worse than death. A backsliding devotee finds all his refined happiness dead within him. He must live with giving memories of his lost moral wealth. Therefore, he who dishonorably relinquishes the fight against temptations experiences a living death. So long as life lasts, the moral hero must never submit to defeat nor fly away from a difficult battle with temptation. No matter how many times the soldiers of evil tendencies invade the castle of self-control, The Emperor of Peace, who is at peace within himself and the spiritual laws of his creator, must again and again launch his battles of inner resistance, never courting the perpetual disgrace of moral desertion. And I guess, excuse me. And it's interesting, this is, you look at the masses of people who've descended into just horrifying drug and alcohol addictions and what it's done in their lives. And, I mean, it's very much explaining that in a lot of, in no uncertain terms. Continuing, let the dead bury their dead. Jesus said, quote, follow me and let the dead bury their dead, unquote. Jesus meant that the man who was bent on burying the dead was himself spiritually dead without having noticed it. All persons who live a temporary, enjoyable life without ever perceiving in communion with God the everlasting joy of spirit are the dead while living. The physical life without spirituality can be spoken as a, quote, variant of death. I'll talk of variants lately. The physical life, temporary and subject to death, is not true life. Spiritual consciousness, eternal and devoid of the change of death, is the true state of life. Devotees who have enjoyed the really living state through the meditative contact of God and who then fall from grace through the influence of body consciousness and materialistic habits are the living dead. Such formerly spiritually living but subsequently spiritually dead men experience the mental torture of loss of God consciousness. But even though they have lost their divine wealth out of spiritual negligence, they can never fully lose the memory of their spiritual happiness. It is never completely forgotten, so no matter how sunk in materialism such persons become. Though one be spiritually dead, he will not be free from suffering an acute, ever-present sense of loss, urging him to reclaim his relinquished blessedness. Though one be spiritually dead, he will not be free from suffering an acute, ever-present sense of loss, urging him to reclaim... A devotee, even in the earlier stages of spiritual progress, who has attained calmness in meditation, but later succumbs to habits of restlessness, constantly feels the painful contrast, a contrast he also endures between the formerly experienced deep happiness of the meditative state and the subsequent experience evanescence, mundane pleasures if he returns to his old ways, quote-unquote, of materialistic habits after a deep meditation. The luster of earthly pleasures is pale before the splendor of God joy. From communion with the bliss of God, the devotee breathes true life and happiness, once quaffed, never forgotten. Yes, and sharing is caring, added, you ain't getting off that easy. ain't that the truth? Continuing, a devotee who has experienced divine bliss should not permit any obstacle to stop his accelerated progress in God. No matter how many times he is dislodged from the divine state, the devotee should make renewed efforts at concentration to counteract the adverse sense of victories. Spurning the deserter's badge of dishonor, let him conquer the inner enemies of restlessness, delusion, and temptation by the all-powerful soldiers of spiritual resistance. And, I gotta say, this is definitely kind of pointed towards those of you out there who are, starting in your meditative process. It's not an easy thing to get going on this, and they're just trying to reassure you that, as you progress, your ego and your senses are definitely going to be trying to battle for control, and so restlessness is definitely one of the most. It's kind of one of the very first steps one has to sort of kind of conquer when it comes to meditation and getting into these deep meditative states. It does take time, but it's time well spent, in my opinion, because in the end, you do get this progress, accelerated progress in God. But life will pull you back and forth here and there. So don't become too despondent if, say, you start in your meditative practice and then you kind of put it off to the side. You can always go back and continue. And it'll be right there. But often it'll be life that pushes you back in that direction, because you realize that, like, I was, something was going on here. I was at least within meditation, when you spend time in quietude, it is actually physically healthy for your body, your heart, and your mind, just in that sense of things. So, continuing. Verse 35, the mighty chariot warriors will assume that thou hast shunned this war through fear. Thus wilt thou be lightly regarded by those who had thought it highly of thee. Quote, O devotee, the all-powerful chariot warriors of spiritual faculties, which have so long fought with you against the materialistic ego forces, and rejoice with you in many victories, will assume that out of fear, weakness, you have forsaken the righteous cause. They who look to you for leadership will begin to regard you doubtfully, seeing you as the conqueror of the senses who has given in to inner weakness. Unquote. When a devotee, swayed by attachment to material habits, shrinks from the waging the psychological battle, he falls into disrepute in the eyes of his own powerful faculties of spiritual resistance. These faculties born of soul wisdom are allegorically spoken of as chariot warriors, for they help the devotee to control the vehicle of consciousness that is drawn by the stallions of the 10 senses. Warrior devotees of prowess and bravery who successfully use their mind chariots to fight the destructive forces are spoken of as Maharathas, quote, Lord of the great chariots, unquote. Great chariot warriors. When a mighty devotee falls from a victorious psychological warrior state, he is considered by his inner forces of wisdom as one who shrinks from battle. His faculties of self-control and willpower revile him as a psychological coward, a spiritual deserter. In the light of introspection, the oscillating devotee beholds himself as an object of pity. His inner faculties ridicule him. Quote, what is the matter with you? You whom we always esteemed as invincible, you conqueror of many inner wars, now yielding to cowardice and mental lethargy? Unquote. Those who are wont to conquer thoughts of strong temptations find themselves thus inwardly criticized when they shrink from fighting the smaller temptations that beset their daily life and harass meditative efforts. Many devotees who, by powerful acts of daily concentration, have driven away the forces of restlessness, may suddenly be stricken with love of bodily happiness and of easygoing ways of life, and thus refrain from combating, by fresh acts of deep meditation, mental inertia and distractions. Every devotee who at will can command his attention to retire from the territory of the senses and to enthrone himself within is an object of admiration in the eyes of his own thoughts. It is not salutary, not spiritually wholesome, to discourage the usually triumphant habits of deep meditation by sudden fitful abandonment. The well-disciplined devotee must not allow himself to lose his composure and resolution in unexpected trials. Verse 36. Oh wow, time flies. Thy foes will speak contemptuously, words improper to utter, maligning thy powers. What could be more painful than this? When a veteran self-disciplinarian suddenly succumbs to some subconscious temptation, the hitherto restrained inimical senses rejoice and ridicule the erstwhile supremacy of their master. What else could so painfully destroy inner tranquility than such derision hurled at the defeated self-control? Both good and bad habits people the kingdom of consciousness. When the devotee plays the searchlight of his introspection on his inner kingdom and beholds the invading hordes of evil tendencies advancing to attain the wealth of his peace and to defeat the protecting soldiers of good tendencies, he should act then as a spiritual general to reinforce his good qualities. If instead the devotee, through misjudgment, mental inertia, or fear of resistance, fails to fight his base instincts, he will find himself jeered and mocked at by his own evil habits. When a woman is afraid to fight the inner battle, his evil tendencies appear as though in the shapes of distinct mental personalities, to taunt him from all sides like specters darting out from gloomy shadows. Their mockery riddles the fallen devotee with a gnawing remorse. Physical pain invades only the body, but uncontrolled moods. The lack of spiritual government produces disorganization within the entire inner being. The backsliding devotee is thus doubly criticized by his good and his evil habits. When the good tendencies find themselves deserted by their kshatriya warrior leader, they silently rebuke him, and the evil tendencies silently throw invectives and shoot psychological darts. Quote, you cowardly one, you dare not raise your head to resist our onslaughts, unquote. The devotee of self-respect does not tolerate any audacious invasion by the evil tendencies of his own past and present. If thou shouldest lie, battling thine enemies, thou wilt gain heaven. If thou conquerest, thou wilt enjoy the earth. Therefore, O son of Kunti, Arjuna, lift thyself up, be determined to fight. Those who enter the portals of death, while engaged in righteous battle to banish any kind of evil, fall asleep on the soft down of meritorious inner soul satisfaction and are lifted in glory to the astral heaven. Those who on earth attain valiant victory over darkness will bask in the light and glory of a tangible peace and inner happiness. A victor in the battle with the senses enjoys the ineffable peace of self-control on earth. A devotee who dies fighting the inimical senses, even without being able completely to subjugate them, attains heavenly peace in the hereafter and great merit in his next life for his resistance to evil. Therefore, quote, O son of Kunti, endowed with her spiritual ardor to invoke divine power, unquote, forsake negative psychological weaknesses, arise, and be determined to wage an overpowering battle with your opponents. This stanza can be interpreted in three ways. Quote, 1. Life is a battle. Each man has to struggle for his physical existence and is more or less subject to his own peculiar difficulties. Everyone who conscientiously fights will either be victorious in solving his problems or fail in the attempt. The Gita points out, however, that a man who puts up a great fight against a particular problem and fails to solve it has gained rather than lost, for he has acquired strength in the battle, so valiant a loser has not been an idle coward. And I've seen this said in a different way, where it's like that a man who puts up a great fight against a particular problem and fails to solve it has gained rather than lost, for he now has to restart from a level of experience rather than from complete ignorance. So that's another way of putting it, which I think is absolutely true. And I think it's a good way to look at, failure in life in a lot of ways, is that, it could either be seen as something that you can, you can denigrate yourself over, or you can see it as, it's part of the struggle, and that at least you learn some experience out of something. So when you do try it again, you'll have a more surer footing, let's just say, in life. Those who resist failure to the end are reborn in the next life as individuals ready for success. Anyone who dies with the thought of having been completely vanquished will be reborn through the cosmic law of cause and effect with a tendency towards failure. So no individual should remain in a state of inertia. When confronted with failures and difficult problems, he should, if necessary, die struggling. On the other hand, he who continuously battles to conquer his problems may succeed, thus enjoying satisfaction even in this life. Struggle and keep struggling no matter how difficult the problem. And I'm going to say this, is that, as much as they may kind of be talking about material struggles, I mean, essentially, the spiritual struggle is the only struggle. Once you have made enough headroom, you've gone enough down that path to realize a lot of your physical struggles become less struggles and just problems that just need solutions to them because you've taken out your attachment from the struggle itself and the let's just say the conclusion of those struggles in whatever way you may think or want them to conclude. Again, the struggle, in my opinion, which is the crux of this entire book, is that internal battle, that internal struggle. Because again, once you start to tackle that, the physical part of the struggle in life becomes much easier. Again, because you are basically waking up your intuition, and you start to see things in much bigger picture style ways that you would have seen earlier when your delusion was in full force. So, continuing, this applies also to those called to bear arms in a war of defense against unholy aggression. The soldier should not shrink from a righteous battle. The noble-minded and valiant will but gain in the end. If he dies in fulfilling his duty of protecting the innocent, the warrior's good karma will follow him into the afterlife, bestowing on him an ineffable inner contentment in the astral world. Or if he be victorious, he will enjoy on earth the happiness and satisfaction of heroism. And number 2, a man who is a victim of sensuality, greed, anger, or egotism must in no wise become neutral and give up the battle just because many times he has failed. To remain in a state of inertia is to be the prisoner of evil in this life and hereafter. The indolent man who dies in the consciousness of his inability or unwillingness to fight his evil habits is reborn with a negative, weak will lorded over by formidable inner tendencies that dictate the policies, moods, and habits of his life. But he who struggles against evil tendencies every day in his existence, never realizing complete success, will nevertheless accumulate sufficient merit to come back in his next life as a man of self-control with strong tendency to resist temptations and fight bad habits. It is far better to be reborn with a serious weakness plus a determination to fight it than to be reborn with a serious weakness plus a sense of helplessness. It makes you think about, too, how important your decisions and the things that you do in your life, it doesn't just affect your current life, it may affect all your other lives as well, past and present and future, considering that time and space don't necessarily exist, right? Let's see here. Enjoy a tangible minimum in this world. No, I don't think I read that. Yes. The sense slave who continually fights his temptations ultimately conquers them. No evil tendency, no matter how strong, is as powerful as the mighty soul, which every individual has inherited from God. Even a supreme quote-unquote sinner, who never gives up trying to conquer his moral difficulties, draws on this invincible power. He who attains a well-earned victory over his senses by continuous exercise of the sole power of self-control will find himself enjoying a tangible mental and physical happiness in this world. And number 3, spiritually the devotee should strive continuously to win back his lost soul kingdom of bliss and immortality, no matter how many incarnations of accumulated ignorance he has to fight. Those who acquire scant progress after years of regular but mechanical absent-minded meditation may become discouraged at not having gained a footing in the kingdom of cosmic consciousness. They fail to perceive that the accumulation of incarnations of delusion cannot be removed with the indifferent spiritual efforts of a few years of one's lifetime. Excuse me. Yes, indeed. Only the yogi who can delve into the region of superconsciousness can know precisely the karmic ratio between his virtuous and evil tendencies. But everyone knows generally whether his good or evil traits outweigh the other. If an individual has acquired a predominance of evil traits in previous lives, he might wrongly conclude that his lesser good tendencies have no chance. But just below the crude coverings of evil and the fine coverings of spirituality is the omnipotent, transcendent soul. By meditation, the devotee steadily increases the strength and number of his virtuous tendencies by tuning his consciousness to the consummate goodness of the soul. Every man, no matter what his predominant tendencies, should strive to rouse his spiritual powers with scientific techniques of meditation. If the spiritual aspirant finds himself habitually wandering into the hands of restless thoughts during meditation, he should not discontinue his efforts. If he dies in a state of discouragement, he will be reborn with the same weak tendencies. Again, he will be confronted with similar temptations. Until all inner evils have been overpowered by a devotee, they pursue him through many lives, causing unending woes. No matter how restless a devotee's mind is, he should continuously try to achieve deeper concentration in meditation. The devotee whose physical death takes place amidst the continuum of his spiritual efforts and constant practice of meditation experiences a state of high spirituality in the after-death state. According to the cosmic law of cause and effect, he attracts to himself after death and during his next incarnation a high spiritual consciousness. He is reborn with stronger mental equipment and valiant spiritual resolve. No matter how much restlessness born of habits of delusion a man may harbor in his subconscious mind, he can always successfully fight it through an indomitable determination. Any devotee who continuously tries to meditate regularly and deeply will ultimately find himself a master of the kingdom of happiness. That devotee who is able to conquer all evil tendencies by continuous, ever-increasing depths of meditation will become established in the everlasting bliss of cosmic consciousness. He will enjoy transcendent happiness and freedom forever in the eternal now. Let's see here. Verse 38. I'm not sure how long this is. Guess it's might be time for me. Oh, you know what? Yeah, I'll finish this last one here since it's the end of the section. And then after that, I'm going to have to hop off for a little while. I may be back, but we'll see. So continuing, verse 38. Equalizing by even-mindedness, happiness and sorrow, profit and loss, triumph and failure, so encounter thou the battle. Thus thou wilt not acquire sin. The devotee of divine fortitude remains unchanged like a stainless steel, alike whether under the sunshine of happiness, gain, or victory, or under a corroding vapor from a sea of melancholy, loss, and failure. The brilliancy of his being thus does not become encrusted by the sin of wrong judgment and action and their corrosive karmic effects. By calmly acting in the divinely imposed dream drama of life, he will be free from the anguishes and afflictions caused by contrary emotions. A basic principle of yoga is that practicing mental equilibrium neutralizes the effects of delusion. Absolutely. Without the involvement of the emotions of inner dreamer reacting to the sensations and incidents of a dream, the dream loses its significance, and especially its hurtful effects. Similarly, the cosmic dream of life loses its delusive power to affect the yogi who, with unruffled inner calmness and even-mindedness, views the dream of life without emotional involvement. This advice of the Gita enables the yogi to keep himself aloof from the agitation and sting caused by the clash of opposites sporting on the mental screen of his consciousness, even while he perceives and enacts his part in the dream drama. This does not mean that a yogi goes through life as an automaton, but he remains in control of contrary emotions, attachment and repulsions, longings and unwillingness. Discriminative and self-controlled, devoted to God and ambitious only to please him by playing well his unique part in the dream drama, the calm yogi remains free of the sin of ignorance and his devastating karmic effects, and finds his way to liberation in the ever-wakeful blessedness of spirit. The worldly man, this section is called Applied to Business Success. The worldly man may interpret this Gita stanza in the following way. Anyone who seeks material fulfillment should keep his mind unruffled during success or failure. A businessman who is not overladen by achievements finds that his concentration is ready for the path of greater success. A man overjoyed at temporary success seldom attains permanent prosperity. In false self-confidence, he may spend his money unwisely and thus court failure. On the other hand, a man who becomes depressed by business reverses loses the focusing power of his concentration, thus impairing his ability to renew his efforts. A general who is overladen at temporary successes in a battle loses concentration on preventing any further invasion by the enemy, and one who grieves too much for a temporary loss in battle is psychologically unfitted to win future battles. Every worldly man seeking success in the financial arena or in any other kind of competition needs to keep in his mind calm to meet the constantly changing circumstances of his life. He must be able to, like a tractor, to move easily over ups and downs in the field of life. An even-minded individual is like a mirror of discretion that reflects the true nature and appearances of favorable and unfavorable events. Thus, he holds himself in readiness to act wisely and improperly without being misled by emotional distortions, which is why intuition is such an absolutely important part of all this, right? The moral man can derive inspiration from this stanza in the following way. A fairly successful moral man should not become unduly overjoyed at his victory over his senses, for then he might relax his efforts and try to run over the thin ice of deficient self-control and consequently fall into deep waters of temptation. Till the final victory is gained, no moral man should be overconfident, nor should he be despondent during temporary lack of self-conscious and thus acknowledge defeat. The resolute, even-minded, moral man steadily marches on to the goal of complete self-mastery. The premature joy of temporary success or the depression of temporary failure should not be allowed to obstruct the way of moral progress. The practical advice in this stanza, so this next one is spiritual success. The practical advice in this stanza for the spiritual man is as follows. The devotee who knows the art of systematically destroying delusion practices even-mindedness even in regard to his spiritual endeavors. A few years of deep meditation gives the devotee wonderful glimpses of divine joy, but this should not make him presumptuous. He has not reached the final beatitude. Indeed. Many devotees become self-satisfied with the superconscious joy of the soul and with beholding a few astral lights and make no further deep efforts at meditation. They thus fail to project their consciousness on the omnipresent joy and light of the spirit. Neither should a devotee who meditates regularly but who finds himself battered by a sudden storm of subconscious restlessness become discouraged or stop making renewed efforts at deeper meditation and God contact. Until one is anchored in the infinite, he must valiantly and evenly race his mental ship of concentration on the calm or rough seas of inner experiences. A yogi whose mind is free from the waves of temporary mental elation, sadness, or emotional disturbances find within himself the clear reflection of spirit. The inner calmness of the meditating yogi penetrates like X-rays through all outer material obstructions. It photographs the hidden spirit. A constant, unruffled tranquility can be gained by ever deeper meditation, ultimately becoming an all-penetrating light that runs through the coverings of matter into the heart of the omnipresent spirit. The yogi, intent on the attainment of cosmic consciousness, union with God, must keep his mind steadily fixed on the inner perception acquired by meditation, not overly involved in his mind with the excitation of the initial stages of superconscious joy or the expulsion of temporary subconscious restlessness. Such a yogi finds his unchangeable altar of calmness, a resting place of spirit. And with that, I think I'm gonna have to throw up the end sign and say, if you guys enjoy the video, hit the like button. If you think other people would benefit from this kind of audio book, share it if you'd like. No pressure, right? If you come across this and you haven't listened to the other sections, I would definitely suggest doing that. But in general, I really very much appreciate you guys joining me whenever it is that you happen to listen to this particular live stream. Thank you for those of you in the chat. You know who you are, and it is an absolute pleasure to bring this kind of information to you guys. One thing, I know a lot of people on YouTube, they do very much appreciate the well-crafted and edited presentations and that kind of thing, and I like those things too. However, there is something about raw information and these raw books and learning. I mean, education isn't sound bites, right? It's much more than that, and I think as people need to recognize that we know practically nothing. And I think a lot of people, once they do realize that, can at least start to ask good questions and realize some stuff. Oh, great, my connection isn't great. But, it's one of those things where that is an old adage, one has to almost recognize and embrace their total ignorance of reality in order to actually begin to understand what any of that is. But we live in a world of intellectual bigotry, and that's for sure. And it's one of those things where it's kind of like, like I said earlier, I absolutely love and appreciate so many of these wonderful scholars that have done just an amazing amount of work and spent so much time prying out these little things out of the text and archaeology and all these other things. But a lot of it is definitely shrouded in this intellectualism, which, while it has its place, also has its hindrances. So, like this book is constantly reminding us, we all have to be careful about the dualistic nature of the various energies that pull us in various ways. And, I think this book beautifully explains the Gita in a way that is not just valuable for this, but it's so valuable. It's so valuable for looking at other texts. And that's going to be a project, I think, once I'm done with this, I'll be doing off to the side, sort of taking some of these old religious kind of mythologies and breaking them down in a way Yogananda does to show just how similar these themes really are, and how they're couched in these type of mythologies and whatever else. Because again, like some of these are kind of things that can give you power over people if you really, again, like there is such a thing as an evil yogi. And so there's a reason why, like, the most esoteric information really has been kept from masses, because they don't know how to do that. And it's kind of like playing with fire with some of these people, not just, within their own souls and their own bodies. I mean, some of the stuff can make a person who's not prepared for this go insane. Like, and again, it's about the progressive building up, like I was talking earlier, rather than the immediate like blasting of your consciousness, which with some people it just it overwhelms them. And so That's why it's important. It's taken you this amount of time to live up to whatever age and time period that you live, and you can't expect to be able to reverse all that life programming and determination that has been essentially absorbed by you throughout your life in the matter of a weekend retreat somewhere, which is funny because this is the big problem with people who, with what some people would call the New Age movement and things like that. I'll go out and go for a weekend retreat, and then they'll come back and be like, "I'm so enlightened." And as much as it may have been a very positive thing for that person, give me a break. I mean, it's just like health, guys. And again, as above, so this, as it keeps telling us, the spiritual it mirrors itself on the physical, and so just like health, if you live a certain lifestyle for a certain period of time, then your body will not be structurally sound as it could have been. And by the time you realize that, you're going to have to spend a good, 3 to 7 years rebuilding your body in a method in which you will actually be able to regain a much healthier body. And that's the thing. It's like what you eat builds the foundation of your body, your temple. And but the thing is that there's an entire section in the Indian Upanishads, which is kind of just like they take out all the really good esoteric information from all the Vedas into these specific things and kind of leaves the rest. But in one section, it talks about, it's kind of an annoying read in a way, because it's just like, this is food, and that is food, and this is food. And what they're basically trying to explain to you is that we're constantly absorbing and throwing out things constantly all the time. And if you are consciously ingesting good food to make a good body, then you also have to think about and consciously ingesting good ideas and thoughts and incorporating that into your spiritual practice and mind, and then bringing those two things together, body and mind, into life. And that's really, and sharing is caring, honor thy temple. And that's how you do honor your temple. You have to, do both things. And that's why, in yoga, there is a push about, there's the whole physical parts of yoga, which people in the West are more familiar with than what I'm sitting here talking about, which is the real yoga, the esoteric yoga, God union, right? Because yoga means union. And it's just one of those things where it's like the physical part of it, Hatha yoga and all these other, and Kundalini, that's there to help you kind of balance your physical side and to detoxify and to basically help you make your temple into a pure thing of meditation. But in the end, you don't even necessarily need to do all those things, because you can, with the right intention and the right meditation, you can do that without ever having to do a single yoga pose. And that's more prevalent, I'd say, in the Shiva style religious schools, which are very similar to this one that we're reading. I mean, Yogananda comes from the Swami school of Shankara, so that is much more based on Vedanta. They have their similarities, and we'll go into the similarities and the differences once I'm done with this, but it'll be very important to look at, because the reality is that the original religion of these people had to do with Shiva and not Brahma, Vishnu, and Indra, and all these other things. And that's an important thing to realize, because even in Hinduism, the Brahmins were never allowed to actually officiate over any Shiva religious practices. And so there was an incorporation, and in some point in history and time, and that's how Shiva then it became incorporated into the Vedic trilogy. And so, interestingly enough, that will be brought out at some point in this book, where he actually refers to Shiva as God. But funny, he doesn't make a big deal about it, but it's interesting connection, because this definitely it's going to have a major connection in the series that I'm doing, the Eagle and the Snake series, because I think I have kind of pinned down the fact that our Phoenician or Carthaginian friends of ancient past were these people of the Shiva style worship. They called him Baal Hadad or Baal Amun, just like the Egyptians eventually as well. And so, weirdly enough, a lot of their sarcophagus and stuff like that have very similar connections with the way that Shiva is actually represented. And same thing with Balamun as well. So we'll get into that in the future videos, but what will be good is that what we're getting here is a really nice base layer of understanding, spiritual understanding behind the Gita, and also giving us a helpful understanding of how to read other spiritual books and to pull out some of the esoteric hidden gems. So we can thank Mr. Yogananda for that, and thank and give respect to the memory of his life and everything that he shared here, because I think this book is just amazing and really peels back a lot of kind of a different way of looking at stuff. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. Sorry for ranting. I will hopefully be back today, maybe in an hour. I'm not sure. It may be back tonight. But one thing is for sure, I will be coming and possibly doing more nightly streams coming up soon. Because I find that I myself was sliding back into the delusion of Maya recently. It's just so many things and to take care of in life. It keeps pulling me back. But just know that I'm, even with all the things pulling me back into the physical world, I'm always listening to audiobooks and getting new research and doing all these things. And so I'm never quite untethered from it all. I just don't always have time to do the live streams. But I'm going to make a huge effort coming, actually from here on out to try to do a lot more. So I hope to see you guys in the next stream, whenever that is. Today, tomorrow, tonight. We'll see. Thank you again for joining me, and I will see you guys on the flip side. Peace.